the majority of the protesters are white, and they are. Now, it's Portland, right? But I don't think that gives this impression that they just got rid of the violence or that there was no violence. I think Max's point of view is just somewhat different in regards to what he was focused on, if that makes sense. What do you think, Shane?
If Ingrid's still there, I'm curious to hear what she has to say, but she might be gone at this point.
Oh, yeah, she might be
I
gone.
think,
It's
Hey,
okay.
yeah, I think she's gone. Yeah, the
I
one thing
can't
that
hear you.
on
Yeah, so
Take over, Jamal.
Shane is here. He's just talking very, very low. But look, I don't think anybody is trying to pretend that there's no violence in Portland. I don't think anyone is trying to pretend that the protesters haven't necessarily escalated the tactics in regards to what they were using to push back. Um, at a certain point, you end up with a fight just to stop the other side. Meaning, it doesn't even become a fight over the specific ideas anymore. At a certain point, it becomes just violence to push back violence. Look, I don't love what's taking place in regards to the protests that are taking place in Portland, or if you want to call it the riots. Um, I don't love the fact that people have to be out here protesting at all. But like I said, we've been covering these for a while, and I don't think at any point in the coverage of this protest that we've made it seem like there wasn't necessarily violence. I mean, Shane had all sorts of consternation associated with it. So I don't want to give that impression, Ingrid.
Let me
Um,
try jumping back in here. Jamal, can you hear
Go
me
for it, Shane.
clearly at this point?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay,
I can't
okay,
hear you. I
good.
can't hear you.
Andre's saying he can't hear me. You're saying you can't hear me. Andre's saying he
Yeah, I
can't
can
hear
hear
me.
you. Andre's saying
Now,
he can't.
now I can. Now I can.
Weird. Yeah,
There we go.
weird technical problem. Anyway, strange technical problem we're dealing with here. Um, quick, quick comment there. The thing that Ingrid said that stood out to me, and I think it makes sense in a broader sense too. She said that it's split in half, sort of that you have peaceful protests earlier on in the night, then you have more violent protests later in the night, and it's almost like never the twain shall they meet, where there's a pretty sharp demarcation between the types of people willing to be out for the first protest and the types of people willing to be out for the second protest. That fits, and it's confusing to talk about the protests in general because in Portland, as well as far as I can tell, across a lot of the country, there is this sharp demarcation where at least two sort of more or less opposing groups within the protest movement, at least opposing in terms of tactics they're using, not necessarily opposed in terms of what they want to have as a result of their protest. These two actions have been going on. These two movements have sort of been integrated with each other for months now, and the violent one, it's pretty easy and I think just for people to respond to and react to with consternation. The other one, I think there's more of a conversation, but the problem is that they're both part of the same movement, as far as I can tell. At least the conversation around them right now has been that they're both part of the same movement. I haven't really heard people. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but have you heard people on the left sort of sharply disavow the violence and try to push those people out, or is the sense that there's this sort of begrudging acceptance of what some people are willing to do if the cause is right? What's your take, Jamarl?
No, so if, in my experience, I've seen several responses. I've seen one response where there were African Americans who were part of like civil rights saying, you know, you guys have lost the mission. I've had other people who say African Americans were somewhat annoyed by some of the tactics that were being used because it feels like it was pulling away from the original conversation that was taking place. And look, you're also going to have some people who think the violence is a means to an end, whatever that end is, even if that end is just pushing back against what they consider to be an intrusion into Portland. I mean, keep in mind, if you're living in a particular area and in your head you framed it in the sense that the cops have invaded your city or Trump's goons have invaded your city, is it really ethically wrong for you to push back against the cops? Under that framing, no. Because under that framing, you are somehow protecting the city from these goons that have invaded. Well, same thing with the cops, right? If Trump says we need you to go to Portland in order to put down the unrest that's in Portland, well, the cop thinks I'm doing the job in regards to the president who told me to go put down the unrest. And he may think of it in a way that you are, that they are two, never the twain shall meet, that type of stuff. I'm just making the point that, ethically speaking, both sides can try to make a decent argument about why they're doing what they're doing, even with the notion that the higher objective is the thing that matters the most, and that eventually you put down when the conflict is over with, you can make it. I guess my basic point is this: Donald Trump, in sending those people in, you have people who are there who push back on it. It's like their response to it. And vice versa, where the cops also have this idea that they're doing what's best. It's powder keg at a certain point, where you do lose track of what you were originally there for. By the same token, I don't necessarily think that nuance should be missed when talking about the protests. So
I hear
that's
you.
the way I see it.
Another way to look at this real briefly, we've got to go into a break in just a minute here, but another way to look at this, I see people getting this wrong on the left and I've seen people getting this wrong on the right for weeks now, where as far as I can tell, at least a few people on the right, but a lot of the more vocal ones are painting Portland as if it has been some sort of perpetual war zone, when in reality, as far as I can tell, the violence has been restricted to near the courthouse there. It's all been in this small area in downtown, basically, where the courthouse is, where the police union is too, I believe, all in a tight little cluster there. So that's wrong. And then people on the left, some people on the left have, as far as I can tell, been denying the violence. I have seen that, basically, that there's either very little or no violence, that the public destruction of property, the destruction of public property has been overplayed, all that stuff. As far as I can tell, those people are wrong too. I have seen night after night, pretty consistently, a lot of stuff. But again, is this all, I don't know, is this where we want to have the conversation? It has a general wider point. So many of our conversations about these things get dominated by these relatively superficial issues. This isn't superficial. This is violence. It's important to talk about this stuff. But then again, but for people who oppose the movement, for people who support Black Lives Matter, whatever the case may be, we're not actually talking about the issues or actually solving the issues when we're talking about this violent stuff, which I think is an argument against violence in the context of protests. But that maybe we can come back. Maybe we can talk about that some other point.
Keep in mind, most of these people are white. This is Portland. I mean, it's Portland, Oregon. And so even though Black Lives Matter might get the hit on it for the most part, the people who are out there protesting and doing this stuff are white.
That's why I would see it as a little bit parasitical. If you have people who are, I don't know, using the banner of BLM to stoke their own fires, that's not entirely fair-hearted for me to say that, because I understand that it's like a broad economic movement. There's some affinity seeking here, but still, man. I kind of can't help but see it that way. In any event, maybe we can pick up this conversation later if you're down, Jamarl. We're going to go into a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Monday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for our regular segment, Education for Liberation with Bill Ayers, where we take a look at the state of education across the country. What's happening in our schools, colleges, and universities, and what impact does it have on the world around us? Our resident expert is Bill Ayers, the legendary activist, educator, and author. Tune in to Loud and Clear this Monday and every Monday for Education for Liberation with Bill Ayers.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. After taking calls last segment, we are going to the second half of our pre-recorded interview with Greg Palast this segment. For people who are listening who don't know, who didn't hear last Friday, I wasn't actually a part of this interview. This is all on Jamarl. We're going to go straight into that. The second half of Jamarl's interview with Greg Palast, who is a best-selling author and journalist known for his investigative reports for BBC, The Guardian, and Rolling Stone. His bestsellers include The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, also the book How Trump Stole 2020. This is what Jamarl and Greg are talking about. They're talking about election fraud, purported election fraud in the lead up to 2020, ongoing stuff having to do with voter suppression efforts. We might talk about this. I think we're going to have some time to talk about this at the end of the hour. We're going into two pre-recorded segments, but we should have at least 6-7 minutes or so to talk about the interviews and a wrap up. But without further ado, here is Jamarl Thomas and Greg Palast.
The Democratic Party would not back the reading of those ballots. And in fact, when they went to Donald Trump stopped that count of those ballots by going to court in Lansing.
That's what I'm getting at.
Did not support when the judge asked, what does Hillary Clinton want to do? And they said to Hillary Clinton's lawyer, do you want these ballots counted? Hillary Clinton's lawyer said, I quote now, we're just here to observe.
That's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm getting at right there. Is it that the Democratic Party looks at it as if look, we have a responsibility for keeping the republic intact. Think of it like Germany, social democrats. And the social democrats in Germany was like, we have a responsibility to keep this country intact. You had the fascists who were like, we don't want this government intact. You have the communists who saying we don't want this government intact. Meaning, is it that Democrats have taken on a responsibility of saying, look, we're the rational party, at least in the sense that rational means we're going to try to keep the system going. And if we attack the electoral system, we undermine it. That's what I'm getting at. Is it that where they're like, we don't want to unravel this electoral system by attacking the electoral system, so it's better to just let Trump or Bush take it instead?
Well, let me give you some information here that's very, very valuable. John Kerry, was shafted out of the presidency in 2004. He's a billionaire. Al Gore was shafted out of the presidency in 2000. He's a billionaire. Hillary Clinton was shafted out of the presidency in 2016. She's a billionaire, or heading towards that. Worth about $250 million so far. You're well rewarded if you shut up. They'll make you a billionaire. And if you complain, you're destroyed. And by the way, this discussion is not theoretical. When I uncovered the theft of the election in Florida, the theft of the American presidency in 2000, working for The Guardian and BBC, Al Gore, one of Al Gore's key advisors, actually Sidney Blumenthal, I'll give out his name, went to Gore and said that the Guardian newspapers had uncovered how the election was stolen in Florida. We should use that. We should go and put that. We should put that in front of the Supreme Court. Here's how they did it: by removing these voters. And they said, well, who's the reporters? Oh, Greg Palast. They said, we hate that SOB. And they said, but that's not the point. They weren't going to challenge. They were never going to say, even though they went to the court to challenge the vote, they weren't going to say that the system is Jim Crow racist and is broken down and this election was stolen by removing black people from the voter rolls. They never said a word. Never a word was raised. Never. And so if they won't say it. And the other thing is Hillary Clinton bagged her, put herself in a corner because Trump was saying, I don't know if they're going to accept the election's result if it's fraudulent. So Hillary Clinton then said, ridiculously, insanely, no one's ever challenged an American vote. No presidential elections have ever been challenged in America. Well, first of all, she must have, number one, been in a coma when Al Gore went to the Supreme Court. So even Al Gore, while he limited his challenge, did challenge the vote for the presidency. The second is that about a third of our elections have been contested and identified as stolen. And the fact that the Democrats have suddenly decided they're not going to complain about it. We had here's a bit of history trivia. It's in the book. It doesn't hurt to know a little history, Americans. After the Civil War, there was the race between the Democrat Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes. And what happened was, not many people remember Hayes-Tilden, but here's what happened. Tilden won the popular vote. Tilden won the Electoral College. Wait a minute. So how did the other guy become president? The answer is pretty simple. They cut a deal. They bought off the electors, 5 of the electors.
No way.
They took 5 Democratic electors and said, tell you what, we're going to end Reconstruction. We're going to let the Ku Klux Klan take over. And as long as you vote for, switch your vote from Tilden to Hayes. And they did. And so we've had all kinds of shenanigans in America. And that, by the way, basically reversed the Civil War. That's what allowed in Jim Crow. And so it's been we've had a lot of contested elections. A lot of them have been stolen in your face. But unlike today, there was a time in America when people really gave a damn that an election was stolen and they'd scream bloody murder.
Yeah, you would think they would, considering the consequences of the election being stolen. I want to jump to Venezuela. Let me get 2 questions in on Venezuela before I let you go. And I appreciate you for coming on. So Hugo Chavez and the conditions that Venezuela were in, how has it changed between Chavez versus Maduro? And if there are changes there, is that more related to the fact that they're under constant pressure from the U.S., meaning when a country is in a war, they take on a war footing in regards to the behaviors that they take towards their population and towards outside of their population? Or is that just kind of an eternal drift from the two leaders themselves?
Okay, couple things. I was covering Venezuela for BBC Television and The Guardian, and I knew Hugo Chavez, the president, pretty well, and Maduro too, who came to visit me, by the way, in my offices in New York. The current president who took over after Chavez died. Now, here's the thing. For 400 years, Venezuela was ruled by white people. It was an apartheid state. They didn't even call themselves Venezuelans. They called themselves Spaniards. 400 years of white domination. And when Hugo Chavez ran for president in 1998, it was an earthquake. It was like Obama being elected, but even more, because not only did the white people control, they owned everything, including all the oil wealth, which was siphoned off and sent to Miami. Chavez changed everything around. And I talked to, and by the way, I knew his opposition too. I was very close to his opposition. I'm a reporter. I'm not partisan in America or in Venezuela. Okay. They weren't, some of these guys weren't so bad. That opposed Chavez. I just knew them all. Okay. But Chavez changed the story so that the majority of people in Venezuela who are dark mestizo, that they ran their own country. They got their chance to run their country and keep their oil wealth. They got free medical care. They got housing. They got public transport. Used to have 1 million cardboard houses, 1 million in Venezuela. That doesn't exist anymore. But then what happened was when Trump came in with his right-wing nutcases, including Bolton, they decided to basically overthrow the elected government of Venezuela and try to impose a guy named Juan Guaido, this whitish guy, very white, lived in America, speaks good English. The U.S. papers love him. And so the U.S. government has recognized this guy, Juan Guaido, as president. Now, how many votes did he get for president? Exactly 0. He never ran. But here's the horrible thing. So you're talking about this white supremacist named Donald Trump, who wants to impose a white president on a dark-skinned nation because he says so, not the voters. And whether I agree that Maduro should be president or not, Venezuelans voted for him. Why did they vote for him? Because he was designated by the dying Hugo Chavez. And that means something. And they're never going to accept a guy like that's imposed by Donald Trump. The reason Juan Guaido didn't run is that he couldn't win. But here's the point. Here's what's ugly. I expect Donald Trump to oppose democratically elected leaders in the world. He doesn't care. He loves the dictators. He loves Duterte. He loves Kim Jong-un. He loves Chairman Xi. He loves the strong men who no one elected. That doesn't shock me. What shocks me is that Nancy Pelosi, Amy Klobuchar, the entire Democratic Party establishment, instead of standing up for democracy in Venezuela, saying they've elected their president, we're going to go with the choice of the people, they have actually said, yeah, let's put the white guy in. He didn't get any votes. He didn't even run, but the white guy should be president. Shame on you, Nancy Pelosi. If you say that in Venezuela, you think it doesn't come back to bite you in the ass in America? You can't say black people shouldn't vote in Venezuela, then say, oh, well, we don't want them to vote in Venezuela, but we're going to let them vote in Georgia? Nah, See, because when you violate basic morality and you don't stand up for democracy in the rest of the world, you lose it in America. Because, and I want to point you to the Declaration of Independence. It says that these rights, that all men are created equal, and these are not American rights. They're not granted by Congress. They're not granted by the Constitution. They are endowed by the Creator. God gave you the right to vote. And that's our national founding document. And it's not white, brown, black. You're endowed by the Creator, period. Now, did our founding fathers live up to all their ideals? Not even close.
Not really. Right.
But they put down that marker. And 250 years later, to have Nancy Pelosi say, nah, we're going to replace the leaders of Latin America with the white guys that we choose. Let me tell you something. We overthrew the elected government of Venezuela. Excuse me, we overthrew the elected government of Iran in 1954. And we ended up, and to do that, we activated the mullahs who had already stayed out of politics in Iran. and we got them to issue a fatwa against the elected president. Well, so now we put the mullahs in charge. How's that worked out for America, huh? So when you don't support democracy, it will come back to bite you. We stopped the election of Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, also in 1954. There was going to be an election. We stopped it because we couldn't let Ho Chi Minh win. How did that work out? So there's no problem in Vietnam. We just stopped Ho Chi Minh from being elected. Let me tell you, when you stop, there was a guy named John Kennedy who said, if those who make nonviolent revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable, it bites us in the butt when we tear down democracies, whether it's Venezuela, Iran, Vietnam, Mexico, Guatemala, Brazil, Argentina. Why am I mentioning these countries? Because in my investigations, we've been messing around with
all of them. Yeah, we overthrew each and every one of those countries that you mentioned. I mean, I don't think people entirely know that, like the banana republics, the things that we were doing was like, this country wants to get basic rights to ensure that, they get healthcare and a wage. Whoa, you're being a communist. We're sitting in.
Wait, I just mentioned, now let's look at those. I just said Iran and Venezuela. What do those nations have? What's their main export? Is it broccoli? I don't think so. I think it's oil. Oh my gosh. So this is what it's about. So when Democrats get involved in the smash and grab for oil against democracy, then it's instant karma. Then they're going to work it on you in California. They're going to work it on you in Georgia. They're going to work it on you in Ohio and Minnesota.
That was the voice of Greg Palast. That was an interview Jamarl did last week with Greg. We're airing the second half of that interview after playing the first half on Friday. We'll be back with the rest of that. Just a couple more minutes here. In a minute, you're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan.
Fault Lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going to go right into it. This is the last quarter, the funniest little chunk of an interview that Jamarl Thomas did mid last week with Greg Palast. We aired the first half of this on Friday. We're airing the second half today. Let's go right back into it. Greg Palast is a best-selling author and journalist known for his investigative reports for BBC, The Guardian, and Rolling Stone. His bestsellers include The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. He also has a new book coming out, How Trump Stole 2020. That was the sort of starting topic for this conversation, but it's gone into geopolitics, gone a few places. We'll get right back into it. This is Jamarl Thomas last week with Greg Palast.
The thing is, I think I'm a little bit more cynical than you are, because I'm not shocked that Pelosi went along with it. Because Obama, if you remember, came out and said Venezuela was a national security risk, and nobody said how. Like no reporter in the room said, wait, how are they a national security risk to the United States? Last question. Media. Now, you've been a reporter, clearly, and being an investigative reporter, have you noticed that there is a pressure that is applied upon you in order to go a certain way with stories? So the Venezuela story is a perfect example. You have these guys basically say Juan Guaido is president of a country that Juan Guaido couldn't win an election to a pie shop in. And the media says, okay, this guy's president now. And you have Western media in other countries that go along with it, the media here.
Totally eating out of the, look. Here's the problem. So there's what's acceptable. For example, even my book, How Trump Stole 2020, they're not going to touch it, this mainstream. And I'll tell you why. because I talk about vote theft. And if you want to be on National Petroleum Radio or any of these other outfits, you have to talk about something called vote suppression, because no one knows what that means. What is a vote suppression? What does that mean? Look, when someone steals your car, Jamarl, do you yell, "My car's been suppressed, my car's been suppressed"? No, car's been stolen. And so I say stolen, and stolen from black people. And, you know, I'll never forget, they got this guy, Ari Berman, who wrote an article for the New York Times. It was almost a complete rewrite of what I wrote in Rolling Stone about a trick called interstate crosscheck, created by a guy named Chris Kobach of Kansas. If you don't remember that name, think Mr. KKK. He's a star of the book, How Trump Stole 2020. So the star of the book, How Trump Stole 2020, Mr. Kobach, they did this article in the New York Times. Now, I said this guy had stolen this system of purging voters, saying that voters had voted in 2 states. In my book, I have a chapter called James Brown Voted 568 Times. They removed 500 guys named James Brown. I can't make this up, from the voter rolls of Georgia, because this guy from Kansas said, we looked at the voter rolls and there's James Brown's voting. James Brown's also voting in other states. They found James Brown in Detroit and James Brown in Baltimore. Now, let me ask you, Jamarl, do you really think that there might actually be 2 different guys named James Brown? In fact, every single one, and I mean everyone, every one of those voters that were matched with a voter in another state, where they said it's the same voter and they lost their registration because you can't be registered in 2 states. Now, everyone had different middle names, mismatched. So David Edward Brown, James Edward Brown was supposed to be the same voter as James Thomas Brown. And that's the game that we play, but overwhelming. Now,
How's that legal?
Well, wait just a second. Here's the important thing. By using common names, 85 of the 100 most common names in America are minority names: Rodriguez, Garcia, Brown, Johnson, Jackson, Wong, Ho, Park. Now, so if you're going to use common names, you're going to knock out voters of color. I got to tell you, when the New York Times reran my story, they took out all mention of race. They couldn't say race. Just the voter. Oh, this was they removed voters wrongly. Great expose. Which voters? We're not going to tell you, because they're not going to say we still have Jim Crow operating in America.
Wow. That's, oh man, I love having you as a guest. Greg Palast, best-selling author, journalist, known for his investigative reports for the BBC, The Guardian, The Rolling Stones. His bestsellers include The Best Democracy Money Can Buy and How Trump Stole 2020. Greg, I really do appreciate you coming on to the show, man. Thank you very much.
You're the best. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Have a good one.
That was Jamarl's interview with Greg Palast. Yeah, great interview, Jamarl.
Yeah, he said, you're the best. It was like, oh, thanks, man. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you've
No,
been
it was a
wanting
great
to talk
interview,
to him
man.
for a while, right?
Yeah, I think we talked for like 40 minutes or something to that effect. Fascinating interview. Palast has been doing this type of investigative work for the past God knows how long. And so he is the guy to talk about it. I think one of the most interesting questions was the one that he couldn't answer. Why? If you and I are in a political contest, and there is, based on what you win or lose when you're in that political contest, creates an incentive for you to win. Because whatever the fight that you have, at the end of the day, winning allows you to kind of run the roost. You get to choose the direction. And you have a situation where Democrats are clearly getting screwed over. Like the voter ID laws, for example. I could play you clips where in Pennsylvania, I think the guy named Mr. Turley or something said, the voter ID laws are going to help Mitt Romney win this race. Like, it was a clear attempt to undermine this stuff. The interstate cross-check. Again, like you said, the New York Times will run these stories. And then the other party, Hillary Clinton, flush with cash, doesn't contest it. John Kerry, same thing, in Ohio, would not contest it. Al Gore in Florida would not contest it. And whether you think they won the election or not, it looks like you would contest it because you were trying to do everything in your power to actually win. Al Gore gavelled one person down after the next. And this is for his own presidency. And so the question I always ask is why? Why do Democrats stand by and let that happen? And if you notice, Palast didn't necessarily have an answer for that one. I mean, well, no, he said you get a lot of cash if you fall in line. I don't know. I just know that part of me thought, maybe they're trying to protect the sanctity of the vote in the United States. Like, it can't be wrong, it can't be off, because that would mean that something is going on that's impacting our elections. That's the way I took it, but that's not necessarily a clear answer on it, even though I think that is the question that people ask.
I can see that. This is stuff I want to learn more about. We should get somebody from sort of the other side, as well as more people from this side. This is going to become, as it is perennially, an issue, but especially going into 2020. I'm actually curious. There's so much other stuff going
That's
on that this probably isn't. It probably is not going to be near the front of the table in terms of what people are looking at.
Well, and that's unfortunate, right? I mean, any country that you're in, especially if it's a representative government, at the very least, you need to know that your elections are legit. What happens when they're not? Or for that matter, what happens even if there's a question of whether they are or not? And the institution itself that's supposed to protect that stuff kind of is still going along with this idea that everybody just kind of believes it, almost like a religious belief. No, I think it needs to go beyond religious belief stuff. I think there needs to be very clear election integrity issues that take place where we try to remedy this stuff, even if it's trying to remedy the concerns that people have. I would love for people to be able to see those votes being counted. It doesn't matter if the votes are counted overnight. I don't care about them whether or not they're counted overnight. I care about whether or not they're accurate. Whether they're accurate is the thing that matters most. And I've heard media ask people like, hey, don't you think that's going to make us look bad if you're questioning the integrity of the election? It's like, well, I think the integrity of the election is the thing that is making us look bad, not just talking about it. So I think that's where I am, Shane. I understand people who are concerned either way.
Yeah, I mean, because there are accusations. This is coming from a guy who's on the left, kind of speaking out against what he sees as malfeasance by Republicans. But there are people on the right who look at voter fraud on the left too, or whatever. I don't know. I want to learn more about this stuff, and it's something I've been interested in learning more about in the past. But ultimately, what kind of gets me is this feeling that, is this just sort of marginal? Are these, in other words, is this an issue that shouldn't be important but has become made much more important by the sort of demographic breakdown, political advertising, and basically this entire political process? And instead of crafting new policies, or instead of trying to sort of make forward momentum to match what the electorate wants, instead makes marginal sort of demographic policy revisements and reforms, and plays around with districts and plays around with who gets to vote where, sort of subtly over time, just to eke out the sort of last remaining political energy from this, you see what I'm saying, from this sort of mass of people who have no real interest in the political system because they have no responsibility for it. Like, for me, that's the real issue. All the voter fraud from either side, we should learn more about it, mainly because it gives us a glimpse into not just malfeasance but also misfeasance, just the breakdown of these, of our election laws and of our electoral processes. But like, behind all this stuff and beneath all this stuff, there's this feeling that this shouldn't even matter. If a few people's votes got counted wrong one way or the other, that would smooth itself out over time if you had a vital political system where people were engaged on a deeper level. That's my sort of last hurrah statement with that.
Yeah, but the voter fraud thing is basically a myth. I mean, that's something that Hague was made out of in order to kind of come up with reasons to be like, hey, we need the voter ID, or hey, we need this interstate cross-check in order to cut voters. And it's not insignificant. I mean, if you think of the number of people that were shaved off the rolls in somewhere like Michigan or Wisconsin or et cetera, and you look at the vote tally, well, there were more people that were shaved off than the difference between the two candidates. So it's not, I mean, I don't think they would do it if it wasn't, it was for naught. You basically have a situation of saying, and yeah, I mean, this is not my point of view. This is just kind of a somewhat flat fact. When you get into this notion of how much voter fraud is there actually out there, and how much voter fraud in tandem with the number of votes that people were being stripped away. Because if I use the term voter fraud, and there's, let's say, like 2 out of 1 billion, and you remove 100,000 votes for what amounts to 2 out of 1 billion, well, that's a problem. When the Voting Rights Act came up under Supreme Court review and they ripped the arms off of it, Many of those states started introducing legislation almost immediately, attacking and curtailing the voting rights of a certain part of their electorate. That part just so happened to vote Democrat. And, like in one case, they had like you weren't allowed to you could use a gun license, but you couldn't use a school license. It's like, oh, come on. At a certain point, that just gets blatant. But I feel you, though. I don't know. I just want our elections to be clearly legit. And I don't think we get this clearly legit from these arguments. And honestly, it doesn't necessarily seem the political actors care one way or the other, because there's nothing that they're putting out to make sure that they are intact.
Yeah, I mean, another thing, just to take in our last couple of seconds here, looking at the issue specifically of IDs and voter IDs or how easy it is to get IDs. A lot of people on the left, I've heard, will criticize how hard it is to get IDs, how long it takes. And then, like you were just saying, criticism of the right here is that they're basically using these as a measure to keep people from voting. But in a weird way, if you look at it, those indictments aren't just of each party, indicting the other. Those are actually both indictments of the system, where it's both difficult to get an ID, and the United States government doesn't have a good idea of who can vote or who can't. Their records keeping mechanisms or whatever aren't adaptive enough to have that info. So in weird ways, what should be just an indictment of our political system seems to be getting masked as a sort of partisan attack by one party on the other, by each party on the other. And that itself is both unhealthy because it keeps us from solving the problem, and a deeply sort of revealing little ironic spin on it, which is each party criticizing the other are actually just identifying actual flaws in the system that hopefully they could fix if they came together to solve them. Anyway, there's the malfeasance too. People do have bad intentions in the parties. In any event, we'll be back in a minute to continue another 2 hours of this show. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. Be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation of propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the politically independent corner, on a flying carpet in the middle of the Arabian desert, I am Shane Stranahan, your investigative radio show host.
Flying carpet in the Arabian desert. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, a Tampa teen, an Orlando 20-something, and a British 19-year-old were arrested Saturday on July 15th hack of Twitter that ended up defrauding over 700,000 of Bitcoin from users of Twitter with false requests for Bitcoin donations posted to high-profile accounts. The coronavirus response coordinator for the White House Coronavirus Task Force, Deborah Birx, on CNN on Sunday said that we're in a new phase of COVID is extremely widespread, warns that people in rural areas should consider wearing masks at home if they're with someone with comorbidities. Birx is interesting in this case because Trump and much of the information they were getting that they were making their decisions on was coming from her, the rosy predictions. And that basically allowed Trump to be Trump. She would make the argument that my predictions were based on people still social distancing and everything else, not necessarily on them throwing open the doors of the economy. But either way, you may not have heard much from Birx. You might have heard more from Fauci, but she, behind the scenes, was one of the main people that was giving Trump his point of view of the world. Top negotiators in Congress are still at loggerheads. Schumer on Saturday said that the negotiations were at best yet, before Pelosi on Sunday said that both parties have yet to come to an agreement on COVID-19 is a serious issue. Microsoft is planning TikTok acquisition for mid-September, with CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, meeting with Trump despite apparently going against White House wishes to distance American tech users from the highly popular Chinese app. Over the weekend, as the administration weighed TikTok's fate, two GOP lawmakers, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida and Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, expressed some support for the administration's review of TikTok, as well as Microsoft's purchase. We strong-armed a country into giving up one of their technologies. That's astonishing. Senate investigators have demanded all communications and meetings from Strobe Talbot, Fiona Hill, and other Brookings Fellow and Department of State officials, including Victoria Newland, Kathleen A. Kavalek, and Winner, regarding the Steele dossier. Also to be supplied are Department of State communications with Sidney Blumenthal and Cody Scherer. New York City has had more shootings so far this year than all of last year. So far, 777 people have been shot on Sunday compared to last year's 776. 7 missing Marines and 1 sailor are feared dead after the search was called off on Sunday. The men were part of a training mission with an amphibious assault vehicle that left 3 others known to be dead or injured. Hurricane Isaias is currently slowly sweeping up the East Coast, centered just off Florida's East Coast, and is expected to make landfall near Myrtle Beach late Monday into Tuesday. A heat wave in Europe has left London with its highest temperature of 100 degrees. San Sebastian on Spain's northern coast saw temperatures of 170 degrees Fahrenheit on Thursday, the highest temperatures there on record. The city of Palma on Spain's Mediterranean island of Mallorca set a local record of 105 degrees on Tuesday. The first U.S. spaceship to return to Earth from the ISS in decades have successfully landed in the waters. This was SpaceX's mission, with 2 astronauts returning into SpaceX Crew cabin ship. And last, there's active wildfire on 20,516 acres in San Bernardino Forest, east of Los Angeles. And Shane is currently breathing and very, very faint smoke from it. You guys, these are the headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. You are currently breathing smoke from the forest fire? That's unsettling, Shane.
Yes. Yeah, this is so I have eyewitness testimony here. Breaking news. Not so much here. No, but I've been seeing this fire build up over the last couple of days, where a couple nights ago, and this is now breaking nationally, over 20,000 acres in the San Bernardino Forest. That's near Big Bear, where I went camping with a friend and family a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, I'm seeing that smoke, and we've been smelling it here. It's gently coming down, but the skies are absolutely covered with it. We're safe, thankfully. We're out in the desert, whereas the smoke is kind of reserved for the fires taking place up in the mountains to our northwestish. But yeah, man, I can smell it.
That's fascinating. California, man. I mean, those forest fires and everything else. It's such a surreal thing to watch something burn down. At one of my the apartment that I was staying in when I was back in Richmond, I woke up one morning. My mom calls at like 6 a.m, and she says, are you paying attention outside? I said, I'm not. My eyes are not even open. And she said, take a look out your window. And one of the apartment buildings right beside us was in flames. You had the fire department, cops, everybody all over the place. And it is a surreal thing to stand there and watch a place literally just burn to the ground. So
it is. Yeah, California specifically is weird like that. And I remember people in the Bay Area, they're the kind of people to do this. I just remember within the last couple of years, when major wildfires have happened, I've seen pictures of like friends and friends of friends or whatever in the Bay Area with like heavy duty respirators. I mean, they were prepped for COVID is the thing. They had these N95s back then, so they still had them now. I've even heard people literally saying that they were pretty well prepared because of it. But just this idea, if you want to see a sort of grimy, modern, dystopian cyberpunk reality, look no further than the Bay Area, where they're wearing these heavy-duty respirators and walking around in the middle of smoke over homeless people on the street. It's not a good look.
Wow. That's, oh man. You know, it's funny. It's not funny. When I was I believe we were in Egypt, and the guy tells me, he says, yeah, I visited California. He says, I didn't realize there was that many homeless out there. Like, because America has this image where people say it's the richest country on the planet. Well, and then they go see California and they're like, wow. Even the food lines, the food courts that have started to pop up. 30 million people didn't have access to food or had difficulty feeding themselves over the last 7 days. And which means you have these pop-up food courts. It's like these old bread lines back in the old days where you could, the grainy footage. And just car after car after car, rows of these cars, just there, just the basics of food. And that was with the $600. That was with the unemployment thing. And so I have to be honest, I am really not looking forward to what the next month or so is going to look like as they fight over that. But, there's no reason why we should have that many people hungry. And I'm sorry, like, that's an utter embarrassment from the standpoint of your country and its ability to just do basic things.
This, this is, there are a few places I could go here, but one of the things this reminded me of, I saw a study come out within just the last couple of days that was looking at, this has to do with like food security and these issues, also the far future, preparing for climate change and stuff, but it was looking at growing food indoors. And so I forget what crops they were looking at, but they had this 10-story facility on, I believe it was a single acre, and they were saying, looking at their estimates, taking engineering into account, setting cost aside, their annual return on that acre would be like somewhere between 220 and 600 times the average rate for that same acre of land. So hundreds of times more efficient if you're building it in like a multi-story tiered building. Again, specifically, they were saying it probably wouldn't be cost effective anytime soon. And I don't know that I would want to live in a world where all wheat was grown in these buildings. But hey, if you can reclaim some natural territory, if you can do some of that stuff, and you get way more efficient production of foods, it's just a matter of what you're actually growing and how many nutrients,
I think
how much nutrients those plants actually have.
I think it would be awesome. I mean, like, think of all the factories. For example, in Richmond, we have an area where all of these factories have just been dilapidated because the places have left. And you have 30 million people that don't have a job right now. Hey, I know what you could do. The government can put those 30 million people to work, and it could be for all sorts of things, like the food production. I think it would be an amazing thing if certain foods were grown in these old warehouses where these things were just made automatic. Basically, you automate the process of food production, where you might need 1 or 2 people in the entire building for the entire thing to do what it does. And you can give away or sell food at dirt cheap. And with the benefit of the government doing it, it's not necessarily doing it for profit. It's doing it in order to get rid of food deserts or to ensure people can eat. I would love that. I think that would be an amazing thing. I mean, even solar power. I want people to not have an energy bill if they don't need to have an energy bill. And one of the ways you could do that is by ensuring that all of the houses to which are being built are up to some kind of energy standard where they're using the sun and energy associated with it efficiently. Meaning, as our technology gets to a certain point, we should change in accordance with that technology to ensure that the best or some good case scenario comes out of it. Solar power is one of them, meaning from the standpoint of energy production and freeing people from an energy bill. But the other one is also. So
it's true. I mean, and this is a long. No, you can finish up there. Go ahead.
No, I was finished. I was just saying the food production is also, both of those things are something that we can definitely do in our society to cut down on the amount of difficulties that we're having, either in food deserts or in this case, ensuring people can get their energy without having to pay a bill each month.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, we already are doing things on a national scale.
Yeah, so my wife has gotten to the point where she's been growing plants and stuff like that. Like, so she has plants all over the place. She's been growing her own veggies.
Or something to join. And so when I was 17, I shelled out that $50 and I went up and stayed on a farm in Canada. And it was kind of this long, drawn out trip with my friend Chris, where we were with our bikes going up the West Coast. We didn't know where we were going to be staying when we started. In fact, we didn't know where we were going to be landing until about 2 days before we landed there. And it was fun, man. Yeah, like organic farming on this former commune in Canada with decades of history working with Americans in the area, trying to rehabilitate them after just like the draconian, horrible conditions of the Canadian education system when it came to Native Americans, and just like huge class issues. Anyway, that was my founding years ago. And then since then, I've been looking a lot more recently into building up your property. And I've been thinking a lot about these issues of not just renewable energy, because you have solar, you have wind, potentially geothermal. There are a whole potentially different kinetic ways of generating energy, even hand-powered stuff for some uses. But this issue of like water reclamation, specifically getting into it recently, the idea of building, this is going to be pretty esoteric for some people, so I won't dilly-dally with it. But the idea of building swales, like building water catchment systems so that you can catch water that falls on your property, and instead of it just running off of it, in a lot of cases taking nutrients or minerals with it, building up the soil base, and just thinking about how cool it would be if there were a sort of national scale campaign or grassroots movement or something like that for people to move back to the land and try to improve the quality of the soil. I don't know. I hear something like this happened in the 60s. That was before my time. But I feel like it'd be good for the earth if we did it right, you know? Anyway.
I agree with you.
That's my little
I think
passion
it would
project.
be good for the earth if we did it right. No, I mean, look, I think there's something to be said about us as human beings dealing with our habitable space and recognizing that insofar as that space goes, so do we. Meaning, if we neglect it, we will pay for that neglect. And maybe there's something about that, getting back to this kind of primary thing of, okay, this is our world, this is the natural world. Maybe if we cared about it a little bit more, you cared about it on a larger level. So I don't necessarily think it's horrendous. I think there's a little bit more to the class element of that, where people don't care about that stuff when their own needs are at stake. Meaning, if I'm hungry, I'm not going to care about this kind of environmental thing. But no, I don't think it's bad at all. I think it makes all the sense in the world if you're trying to reclaim your world and the environmental space of your world. No.
All right, let's
we have a caller. So let's take this caller. Yeah, let's take this caller when we come back. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Deshaun, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We're taking calls this segment. 202-521-1320 is the number to call. Quick note also for people listening, at 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific, we played our interview, Jamarl's interview, with Greg Palast. It's about elections fraud in his book, How Trump Stole 2020. At 8:30, in just a couple minutes here, we're going to be talking with Tom Luongo, talking about Flynn, the legal saga, the drawn-out ordeal that Michael Flynn has faced, maybe a trial by ordeal that he's faced over the last couple of years, really continuing with this new appeal court in D.C. And then at 9:30, we're going to be talking with Dr. Cynthia McKinney. It's been a while since we've had her on. Very glad to have her back on the show, talking about her new book, When China Sneezes. Anyway, we're taking calls this segment. 202-521-1320 is the number to call. We have callers on the line right now. Louise in Virginia, you're on. What's going on?
Yes. Oh, boy, Tom Luongo, please don't forget to remind him to talk a little bit slowly for us slow people, please. You did it before, and he laughed. He thought it was great, and he complied. Could you please? I'm calling in response to your response to caller Ingrid. Was concerned about the violence during the demonstrations in Portland. I'm not satisfied with your response to her. It seems to me you underplayed and dismissed her concern, and I'd like you to have someone on who directs their attention more to Ingrid's concern, which is a legitimate one, which you underplayed, please.
Wait, before you leave, Louise. We have covered the protests going on in Portland for, at least a month, if not longer. And I don't think at any point during the time where we've covered the protests where we downplayed it. Shane has been very particular about the violence on the protests. I have never said that there weren't violence or going on. I mean, in fact, much of the conversation we've had on it had a certain degree of consternation in the amount of violence, or for that matter, property destruction that was taking place. I guess my point is whether Max has a specific focus on that, or whether or not the show talks about it in a particular way. I think both matter. Max had a specific focus. The show talks about it in a more rounded way. I don't necessarily think, I don't know necessarily what you would need from that. It's like we want to bring somebody on to say that there was violence in Portland. Yes, we know there's violence in Portland. That's not necessarily the issue. And I got to be honest, Max's focus or his point of view on that is his own. I don't necessarily have to get him to admit, yes, there's all sorts of property destruction in Portland. I don't necessarily know what the practical value of that is.
It sounds like they wanted to have another side of that conversation with Max. It sounds like, again, it would be interesting to hear how they would prefer the conversation to have gone. That's not for me to step in on necessarily. We can have him back on, and I'd love to. And it, assuming this stuff is still going on when we talk with him again, which it probably still will be, or at least we'll still be dealing with it.
We can don't say that.
We probably will be, man. But we can come back to it with him then. But Louise, are you still there?
She's out.
She's out. Okay. Okay, Seth. Thank you for the call, Louise. I appreciate you calling in. I appreciate the some of the stuff here. If you want to, I think we can go to the next call, and maybe we can come back to this topic. I just want to make sure we get him in.
Yeah.
But Bruce in Wisconsin, you're on. What's going on?
Hello. Thanks for having Greg Palast on. Been following him for a lot of years. And he brings up things that, the media just doesn't talk about. And the idea of why didn't the Democrats look into the vote in Ohio in 2004, in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania this last time around? You didn't mention the people who did, and that was the Green Party. And ironically, it hurt us because a lot of people joined the Green Party in 2016 from Bernie Sanders. And then we challenged the vote in Wisconsin and other states. We lost those people because people thought we were helping the Democrats. But the point in this was that even a third party doesn't have a chance if we know that the system is the votes aren't being common, and that's what we set out to prove. That's what Jill Stein set out to prove. And perhaps you should have somebody from her campaign talk about that sometime. And the other thing is that, different topic, the idea of the swales and things, that's an entire movement called permaculture.
Yes.
That has been helping people design those systems for many years. And I'm a graduate of permaculture education, a place down in Illinois. But I've been trying to apply it on my own little quarter-acre property here in Wisconsin. And that's a different way of looking at how we fit into the world and how we can, how there's energies all around us that we can tap into. So that'd be another good topic to bring somebody on and talk about permaculture.
I'd love to. Yeah, no, this has been, when I was a producer on the show, I didn't feel too comfortable getting into my own personal topics. And since then, there's the hesitation to try to take the show too much in your own direction. But I'd love to get into some of that stuff. Permaculture broadly, for people who don't know, it's something like ecological design thinking or something like this, where the way that you're designing your land and the way that you can apply permacultural principles to your own life and to other areas of your life, but you're basically looking to nature for principles that you can learn that you can then apply to your own designs. And so specifically in gardening, it has to do a lot with biodiversity, raising a number of species in close contact with each other, so you don't get these monocultures that are susceptible to, crop devastation or pests because they're all the same. Basically, you can just get these strains of various forms of pests that will come through and knock them out. Anyway, diversity is one thing. Also, a sort of wider awareness of the interconnectedness of different types of life. So, for instance, looking at the soil on a deeper level, looking at the roles of mushrooms, all these things. Anyway, permaculture is pretty widely known, but I'd love to get somebody on to talk about that. What do you think, Jamarl?
Yeah, I don't hate that. I mean, especially if it's put in the context of how to incorporate that stuff into our current society. Maybe not even just purely on an individual standpoint, because most people don't have land or resources like that. But I'm not against it. I mean, the Jack Fresco thing, he was heavy into this notion of having a kind of techno biodiversity where you have sensors and all of these type of things that can pull back information from the ground that you're working with. So you get water samples, you get how much minerals that they made or something to that effect. And basically you run your environment with this kind of extra additional knowledge trying to help you keep your environment intact. No, I'm not against it. Yeah, I'm not against that. We can bring somebody on for that.
The Jack Fresco ideas are interesting, and I'm into those too, like the ideas of having really in-depth, fine-tuned analysis of the scientific composition, like you were saying, of your soils, of the local air quality in plants, just because that would help you to monitor stuff. But there's also something to the sort of wildness and the organic planning in the sense of this larger organism that you're trying to build that you'll never fully get a grip on. It's always kind of 3 or 4 steps ahead of you in different ways. That is a lot less susceptible to the sort of positivist planning that you were talking about. But it's still very cool to have a grip on. And, in these indoor farms that you're talking about, the 10-story farm thing that we were talking about earlier, that's where that would come in perfectly if you were trying to manage the entire thing.
I would love that.
Like clockwork.
I would love that. Because think about how, like, we hear food deserts. Like, these areas that people can't get access to nutritious, green, healthy food. And it's like, well, why do you have that food desert there? And is it possible? The government, if nothing else, can create jobs. And it's just a matter of technological know-how in order to set up a company that would kind of automate many of the processes that are associated with it. We have the skills. So it's not an issue of we can't do it. It's just an issue of we don't prioritize and do it. But amply doable. I mean, and the amount of food production that you could get if you're talking about multiple places, the cut or the lowering of the cost of certain vital foods that people might need for nutrition. I am a sucker for that stuff.
Yeah, no, same here. All right, I think we should go to the last caller we have on the line. If you want to call in, 202-521-1320. We've got a couple of minutes left. We could probably take one more after this, maybe even 2, but probably just one. Leo in Miami. Leo, you're on. What's going on? Leo, can you hear us? If he can't hear us, I think we've got to drop him, sadly.
Yeah, he might be gone.
All right, Leo, I think Leo is gone. He might have passed out. Hopefully Leo is okay. Please, nobody call 911 until you hear further disconfirming evidence that Leo is not okay. Actually, I've been thinking about the thing that Ingrid was first saying and that Louise was second saying. We're going to be going into this with Tom a bit in just a couple of minutes. We're talking not just about the Flynn trial, the wider Flynn story, but also Seattle, and that'll probably touch on Portland, order in Seattle, the protests in Portland. So we'll definitely have a chance in this next segment to get back into this stuff. And Louise, I will tell Tom, I will ask him to slow down a bit. He did not seem to take that at all badly last time, so happy to do an encore this time. Yeah, I'll put it like this. I'll be a little bit meta for a second. It's interesting stepping into the role for a little bit here of radio host and seeing what that whole process is like, because you're having to think a lot about the sort of in almost like a chess sense, but not quite that sense in the debate sense. You're thinking about the possible responses. You're trying to basically pick up the feel of a conversation, not just while you're in it, but as it can happen, because you're trying to predict how a lot of this stuff can go so that you can have good radio, so that the conversations you have, they're structured interestingly, all this stuff. Anyway, and this actually touches on like the philosophy of ethics and the philosophy of logic, or just the philosophy of sociality in a weird way, where like if you want to get somewhere good with a conversation, if you want to get to the meat of the matter, or you want to get to the right conflict, not a superficial conflict, but something that grips people, you've got to sort of anticipate a lot of this stuff in advance. And normative things come into play. So I don't know how the heck to, like, I'm even trying to wrap my head around how I see this situation in Portland and how I see the optics around it and all the like permutations of conflict that the public has with itself over the optics on this stuff. I mean, it seems like pretty much everybody who recognizes that there is violence to a rounding error that I've heard at least says that there shouldn't be violence. But then a lot of people who recognize that there are violence also accept that it's a sort of byproduct of this systemic or mechanical thing or this response to the system. And since they approve that response, they sort of, I'm not going to say they tacitly approve of the violence, but there is the feeling that there's like a forgiveness of the violence that amounts to a tacit approval. And that's a difficult thing to deal with in a sort of social context. Like I just don't know how to, I understand the logic behind it, and I can fit myself into the logic itself, but I also understand the backlash. And at this point, I don't see a way out of that sort of contradiction. Does that make sense, Jamarl?
Yeah, it does. I mean, the way out the contradiction is basically your biases are on the table for everybody else to hear. You explain where you're coming from, and you take a particular cadence when you're going about your interview. The rest, look, there's never going to be a situation where everybody agrees with you or everybody disagrees with you. You're going to have people who have all sorts of ideas on that stuff, and they're going to come away with, I wish you would have said this, or I wish you would have said that, in pertaining to the interview. There's no way to reconcile that, nor I don't think you should. Basically, you try to do the best interview that you can do based on the topic that you're interested in, and vice versa. And if he goes on somebody else, if he's on some other, right-wing channel, and that right-wing channel is more interested in talking about X, then they talk about X. In my case, I wanted to have a conversation with him about cancel culture and some of the other items that were going on in the protests and everything else, and get his point of view on it. It wasn't there to have a back and forth, spirited back and forth with Max Blumenthal on that issue. But I feel you. If you have some people who thought, hey, I wish you would have asked this over that, that is as natural can be. I don't think one thing of it. I mean, that's the way I think of it. So that's my framing of it. But we're at a break. We have to get to the other headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming up, we are going to have Tom Luongo. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Shane Stranahan. I am joined by Jamarl Thomas. We are coming to you from across the divided states of America. We're joined by Tom Luongo for this segment and the next. But real quick, if you guys want to listen to us on the air in DC, you can. We're on 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also on in Kansas City, 102.9 and 104.7 FM, also 1140 AM. You want to listen to us online, you can. Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Music, and Spotify. Those are the places you can find us for audio. For video, you can check us out on YouTube at Fault Lines Radio. Also, just do a quick search for either Fault Lines Radio or Jamarl Thomas. That's Jamarl's channel there. He is live, although I hear his internet has been spotty this morning, so please forgive him if it drops, but it seems to be pretty solid at this point. You can also, if you want to check us out over on Periscope on Twitter, just go to twitter.com/faultlinesradio, and you'll see our live Periscope feed up top. With that out of the way, we are joined for this segment and the next, like I said, by Tom Luongo. Tom is a geopolitical analyst and publisher of the Gold Goats and Guns newsletter. Also, Tom, hi, how are you doing?
You there, Tom?
Can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me?
There you are.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning, guys. How are you?
Good. How are the goats?
The goats are fine. It's high summer. The grass is green and rich, and I don't have to feed them very much hay, so it's all is well.
That's good to hear. All right, a quick question on the goats. Actually, we were just talking about gardening and permaculture and stuff in this last segment. Real quick, are you? So I forget. You said last we talked, I think, that you were fencing in the goats. This was a larger project. Usually is, especially with goats. Are you just doing hard wire fencing? Or are you doing electric fencing? Is it going to be portable? Or are you putting it in place to be put in place?
Sure. No, we've run with electric fencing for a long time now, because when we first put the goats in, we just didn't have the capital to do hard fence, and the electric fencing was something we could afford, and it works reasonably well. We have to, but we're shipping that out for a hard fence. We're going to hard fence our pastures this fall. That's our goal. So.
That makes sense. Cool. And real quick on that, actually, follow up with that. I'm guessing not, since you're doing the hard fencing, but are you planning on doing any of the sort of more like intensive rotational stuff? Like often people will do that with sheep and with cattle. I haven't really heard people doing that with goats. Is that the kind of thing that you hear people doing, or are you doing that yourself, where you basically you rotate them quickly through different plots?
You should. You can do it with all livestock. The pasture rotation is a very effective way of keeping your keeping your pastures rich, and keeping the parasite load on your animals low. And that's the biggest thing you have to fight with goats, especially here in Florida, because Florida is not particularly good goat country. It's too humid for them. But yeah, we would do that if we had that amount of land to do that with. We have a very small herd of goats, so it's not a big deal. We're just going to fence in more land than we currently have for them, and that will itself lower the parasite load, and then also create a separate paddock for the boys to grow up on, so that we can have them stored, effectively meat stored on the hoof.
Cool. That makes sense. That sounds good. Yeah. That all fits perfectly in. All right. I think we should.
Yeah, but all the pasture rotation stuff is absolutely just as general good best farming practices or livestock management practice. Without doubt.
Yes, totally. No, it just depends on how often you're doing it. I know some people will do it every couple of months, especially with goats. That seems too long, because goats will just tear your stuff down if they're sitting there, especially because goats are they're picky eaters too. So they'll go for the really, really good crops you have growing or whatever. They'll leave a lot of the weeds. And then if you have that cycle continuing, you have the weeds growing. Go ahead, though.
Well, what they do is, here in Florida, we have a very particular set of parasite problems. Here, the biggest problem we have is the barber fall worm, which is a worm that causes them to be anemic by attacking their stomach lining and causing them to bleed internally. And it has a 21-day life cycle. So if you do pasture rotation with goats here in Florida, then moving them every 3 weeks is the way to go, because what you wind up doing is you wind up breaking the cycle, or every 3 to 4 weeks you wind up breaking the cycle of the worm, and thereby you have to do less chemical worming and all the rest of it. And it's especially important if you're running a dairy farm, because the dairy animals are under such stress from the constant production of milk all day long. They don't put a lot of energy into themselves. They put it all into their milk. That's the way they've been bred. So this part of the summer is great for growing meat goats, and it's good for growing. It's when the dairy goats are in their high production, but it's also when they're most susceptible, most vulnerable to parasites and disease. So it's this constant fight, and so so you really have to match your level of engagement, your level of production with the amount of work you're willing to do, and that's been a hard struggle for us over the years, trying to find that right balance.
I believe that. That sounds like it would be. All right, we're glad to have you here. We're talking, I think, first about Flynn. Real quick, we had minutes ago. She was the one who called in last time too. She's a fan of yours, but she says that you talk very quickly, and she sometimes has a hard time hearing you. She just asked politely if you would be willing to slow down slightly. I'm relaying that message. I'm trying to keep my hands clean. I don't mean to tarnish either of our reputations by dragging ourselves down mutually. But
no worries. I'll do my best. So what are we talking about this morning? Michael Flynn?
Exactly. Yeah, I think we're starting off there. She's a huge fan of yours. Just getting that out of the way. Anyway, we're talking about Flynn specifically. Flynn's saga continues, where the appeals court, the appellate court that was overseeing this stuff, is now going to be going into motion. What's the latest on this? This came out last Thursday, I believe. What have you been seeing about this decision, Tom?
So what happened is Judge Emmett Sullivan it refuses to give this case up, even though the Department of Justice has filed a motion to dismiss the case, because they have a round of evidence now, which is effectively exculpatory for Michael Flynn. The case should be gone. The Flynn's legal team filed for a writ of mandamus to force the judge to dismiss the case. The judge refuses to do so. He was smacked down by a 2-1 decision by the appellate court, and then he then turns around and says no, I've not completely exhausted all options. And this is what the writ of mandamus is only really effective if there's no other legal recourse for Flynn to get injunctive relief or to get relief from this charge against him. And therefore, this is Judge Sullivan, I want the whole case heard in front of the entire appellate court en banc, which is the 11 judges within the court, one of whom have recused themselves already. So it'll be a panel of 10 judges. This is completely and utterly unprecedented. The writ of mandamus itself was almost unprecedented. It's very rarely used, and it's already an extremely strange event. The truth is that Judge Sullivan is acting politically at this point, and without a doubt, and in effect is acting as a separate prosecutor, as his own prosecutor in the case, since the prosecution is withdrawn their charge, and that's where we are.
And then he basically assigned his own prosecutor, right? Wasn't that a sort of more recent step, I believe, after the earlier appellate court came down with their decision?
Right. What he did was he assigned not a prosecutor per se, but someone to argue his point for him as to why the writ of mandamus should not be enjoined, and yada yada yada. And so that now is being taken to the entire district court for them. And that's going to happen. Now the question is going to be, what are they going to do? And the truth is that, well, unfortunately, 6 out of the 10 judges were Democratic appointees, including Judge Sullivan himself, who's an Obama appointee. Now we're looking at this, if I have that right. So we can pretty much figure out where this is going to go. And if you want the cynical read on this, and it's a sad and unfortunate part of this, is that what they're trying to do is create that moment where they force Donald Trump to pardon Michael Flynn. And then then they can write the narrative that Flynn was never exonerated in a legal sense. He was only exonerated in a political sense, and therefore they can keep this as an issue rolling forward. And it's sad and pathetic because the Department of Justice has dropped their case against him. Worse than that, they withheld evidence from the legal team, from Flynn's legal team. They held, and from the judge himself. So the whole thing is, it's really a miscarriage at every level of justice, and it is what I think what Sam Francis used to call, when he was writing for Chronicles magazine all those years ago, anarcho-tyranny, which is anarchy for us because we don't have to abide by the rules, but we're going to apply the rules ruthlessly to all the little people. Now, not that Michael Flynn is a little person per se, because he's a former general and formerly a very powerful man, and not someone whose record I'm all that crazy about. I'm not going to sing the man's praises or anything, but it's clear in this situation that he's being railroaded for political purposes. That's just very clear.
So, what do you think will happen if Trump did pardon Flynn? Meaning, if you think that was the reason why they're going after him. Because, look, I think I agree with you on this one more than I disagree with you on it. It does seem like this is witch hunt territory. And any of the cases involved with people that were associated with Trump seem to have gone into the witch hunt territory. Look at what they did to Stone. They raided his house like it was a compound. And so I feel where you're coming from with this particular one. What do you think happens, though, if Trump did pardon Flynn? If Trump did pardon Flynn, what do you think is going to take place politically that is going to be disastrous to Trump for doing so?
I don't know that it'll be bad for Trump. I just think it'll be more. I think that, look, Jamarl, I really feel that at this point there's a whiff of desperation at every level of the Democrats' non-strategy to install Biden as president, which is to make this campaign about everything except Joe Biden and make it all about not Donald Trump, right?
Yeah,
that's their strategy. Because they don't have any strategy for Biden, because by all reports, Biden's got dementia. So believe salt that analysis to taste. I think that they're going to try this. This is another one of their tactics to try and extend this situation for as long as possible and keep it going as close to the election as possible. Note that the appellate court's going to meet en banc on August 11th, which is the day after the Democratic convention ends, right? Because that's on the 7th to the 10th. So there's going to be this intense period of scrutiny where they're going to be able to write headlines that are pro DNC for all intents and purposes. And that'll carry the Overton window or carry the news cycle through to the middle of or to late August, right? And that's the best they can do at this point. And then after that, Trump will have to respond. Personally, if I were Trump, I would have pardoned Flynn the minute that the appellate court agreed to hearing the case en banc. I would have just started the process now and gotten it out of the way as early as possible. That's what I would have done. But I don't work for Trump, but obviously, but I would have just short-circuited the whole thing and went, oh, this is where you want to go? Let's go there. Let's go there together. Let's do it right now. And then it'll be over because no one cares. I mean, the truth of the matter is that nobody really cares. I watch this stuff and I'm saying to myself, why are you guys doing this? Right? I mean, from a political strategist perspective, all you're doing is shoring up the very states you've already won. You're shoring up blue states. You're shoring up people who believe in the Russiagate narrative. America's moved on from that completely. So to me, this is a losing thing. I think it's just a complete travesty. And I think that at a certain level, I want to believe, my personal opinion on this, is that I think this is purely about what Flynn knows from his time in the Obama administration and trying to keep him bottled up as long as possible and delay any potential action by the Trump administration once he's free and clear of these charges, and now he's free and clear to speak about what it is.
Okay, wait, Tom, let's come back to you, and let's come back to that particular topic once we come back from the break. You guys are listening to The Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. The person who you guys are hearing talking is Tom Luongo, geopolitical analyst and publisher of Gold, Goats, and Guns and newsletter. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Tune in to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the latest news, commentary, and political analysis. What's really behind the political and social crisis gripping the United States and the world? Forget the spoon-fed soundbites from the pundits who know so little about so much. We bring you independent experts, analysts, and activists. Learn what really makes the decision makers take from the boardrooms of Wall Street to the West Wing of the White House. Here is where the people fighting for change speak and are heard loud and clear, 5 days a week on Radio Sputnik and SputnikNews.com. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We're joined now by Tom Luongo, continuing a conversation we opened up in the last segment, talking about Michael Flynn. We're also going to be talking about the idea of order in Seattle. This is coming after a new video with that title published by Tom. In any event, we're picking back up on the conversation about Michael Flynn. We're talking about the idea that various parties would want to keep Michael Flynn from talking about his work in the Obama administration, what he knows, the idea that this sort of prolonged case, this prolonged legal case where the DOJ asked Judge Emmett Sullivan to stop, then Flynn's lawyer had to file a writ of mandamus, and basically the judge has been dragging his legs and delaying things as a part of this partisan political process. And again, going back to this idea, what do you think he knows, Tom? What do you think Michael Flynn knows that Judge Emmett Sullivan and sort of quote-unquote co-conspirators here would want to keep him from talking about?
Point, Shane, I'm gonna beg off. I'm gonna say that it's just been there are people who are far more qualified than me to talk about that because I don't even really quite remember what Flynn did for the Obama administration. I have to beg off on that. But there is that angle to this case, and I just wanted to make sure I brought it up. I don't really want to belabor this point because I think that it's important because I really do believe that Obama is the one driving a lot of what we're seeing behind the scenes, right? Biden is Obama's candidate, right? And a Biden presidency and potentially, say, Susan Rice as his running mate would be Obama's third term because Obama would be running things behind the scenes as the shadow president. And so, we know that the move against Trump this year has accelerated the moment Trump tweeted out Obamagate. And it became very clear that the whole narrative around that January 5th meeting with Obama and Biden and Rice and the rest of them, and how they went after Donald Trump and put the whole Russiagate thing into motion during the early days of his presidency. We know that that's a problem for them. And how much of that does Michael Flynn know about? And how much more does he know about the spying operation or anything else? And why was he fired from the Obama administration? These are all very important questions. And I think that while Flynn's case is out there, it keeps him from being able to work with the Department of Justice in any way on what he may or may not know about it. It makes perfect sense. It just makes sense from an incentive perspective, especially if you're Obama trying to drag this out for as long as possible. Because the last thing they want is any kind of motion forward on John Durham's investigation into them, for example, and all the rest of that. So certainly have that happen before the election. If they can delay that until after the election, well, that's fine. All right.
I hear you.
And then hopefully they'll be back. Hopefully they'll be back in power at that point, and then they can quash all of it. I think that's honestly the strategy. And it just from a general perspective, that just makes sense to me, strategically and tactically. So.
Yeah. Okay, I hear you. Let's move on. We can come back, talk about Seattle. I'm actually going to start with Portland for a second because that's been the subject of most of our attention on this wider topic of civil unrest going around in the United States. We've been talking about Portland quite a bit, but there is still ongoing stuff in Seattle, specifically on the legislative level, where the city council has been considering defunding the Seattle police by 50%, where there's a slight split there in the Seattle City Council after it was supposed that they would have a veto-proof majority to basically pass this. Anyway, we'll see more about that stuff early this week, I'm sure. But I saw you were talking about this and generally the situation in Seattle. Tom, what's your take on these issues?
Well, the thing is it's really funny. If you get me 15 years ago, right, as a libertarian, we were complaining about, the rise of the militarization of the police and police brutality and civil asset forfeiture as a consequence of the drug war and all of this stuff, knowing then that this was only going to get worse over time. Was an opponent of the Clinton crime bill. My dad, his NYPD, was against the Clinton crime bill. So because he understood that would nationalize the cops at a certain level, right? So what's happening in Seattle today and what's happening in Portland and other areas, aside from the obvious political angle on this, which is over the top, right in your face, that they're trying to create a Maidan style moment of confrontation between federal troops and the protesters and all the rest of it. Either the Maidan, Tiananmen Square, you name it. They just need some kind of bad press for Donald Trump before the election, and they're trying to goad him into doing something dumb or to create these conditions where something terrible and regrettable happens. But to take a step back from that, and what you have is civil libertarians have been worried about the militarization of the police for a long time. I'm sure everybody here, we're all in agreement on this. And it's part of the conversation that we all wanted to have after the George Floyd killing, which had been completely hijacked by, well, so now, when you look at what's happening in Seattle, this move to defund the police, as a flower-throwing anarcho-libertarian, I'm all for demilitarizing the police, and I'm all for community-level enforcement, grievance enforcement, right, or dispute resolution and crime investigation, which I think the police should do more of and less quote-unquote law enforcement. But we're not in a position as a society today to go there immediately. We've got a long way to go from where we are as a society and the way we're organized and the way the rules and the regulations and everything else are constituted and our responsibilities as citizens. We're not ready for that kind of power yet. We don't go that kind of restoration of the responsibilities that come with individual liberty, which never seem to make it into the conversation about, liberty. So everybody thinks in terms of being libertine, either on the left or the right. And we argue very strenuously, committed libertarians, that with individual freedom comes individual responsibility at a very high level for yourself, for your family, for protecting your property, for all of these things. And there should be less emphasis on the police doing it for us. But we're not in a position where we're ready to assume that responsibility yet. And they're pushing this to its extreme in Seattle as of this moment. We're going from a maximized police force to no police force, and they're going to do it overnight. That's going to cause extreme. That is not going to work.
Tom, I think I agree with you on
It is not going to work. It's going to be more of what we've seen, what we saw during while the Chaz was NACHOP was in place. We're seeing it in all over New York City, Atlanta, and Portland, and others, where they told the cops to pull back so that the quote unquote de-escalate the violence. And then the real question is whether Mayor Jenny Durkan is just a pure ideologue on this issue, or is she a pure political animal, or is she somewhere in between?
Yeah.
And I think, and I don't know the answer to that, but I don't really care because it's just silly, honestly, and it's dangerous for the people of Seattle. One of the points I brought up. So go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. I was just going to say, I actually think I agree with you on this. Look, whatever I think are the differences or the reasons why poverty might be in those communities, we may disagree on that part. We may even disagree whether or not the poverty in and of itself is part and parcel to the reason why there may be violence in certain communities, or for that matter, why many of these people might be in the streets. Because in Portland, those people are white. And, and many of the people in some of the other areas, same thing. It doesn't necessarily just break down on these kind of racial lines. I think my biggest concern with the defund the police argument was that it avoided the reasons why the cops were there. Like, if you were making an argument to me that we need to get rid of the cops, I said, great. But I would also kind of go into this thing, well, yeah, but why are the cops there? Why did the communities think they're necessary? Why do those people think that they need a strong man with a gun in order to protect the little that they had? And don't you have to deal with that before dealing with this kind of other thing of just get rid of the cops? I thought that was going to be problematic in and of itself. And in some of those areas, I think it was like New York in one cases, with how the crime rate spiked, in Chicago, and some of these other areas. I think that's what we're seeing as somewhat of a result. So I think I agree with you on this. It's like, yeah, you want to get rid of the militarized cops. You want these communities to be safer, where they don't necessarily feel like they need a cop, a hero in the community with a gun and a thick throat. Because that's not freedom, and that's not even liberty. If you feel that you need to have this thing in your community protecting you, despite the fact that this thing can also harm and take your property. So where does this end, right? Like, do you think that this is more ideological, or do you think this is the more chaos, the better it is to go against Trump in the election? I mean, that's a pretty cynical read, if that's true. But even though I don't necessarily take it as being false, but go for it.
I think it's a bit of both, Small. I'm very convinced that it's both. I think that it's being driven at whoever's driving this bus, right? Because all of a sudden this defund the police thing comes up out of nowhere. Like that's part of an operation on the part of whoever is driving and funding this bus. You want to call it Soros, you want to call it Steyer, you want to attach a name to it, go ahead and attach a name to it. It doesn't really matter. What's obvious is that's part of the strategy, right? The strategy is we're going to create chaos, and one of the tactics is we're going to try and highlight the fundamental problems with the police department so that we can remove them and create chaos locally. And then we're going to try and blame Trump for the chaos. I don't know how you do that because he's not the one, telling the police departments not to stop the rioters, right? But you can see where but if you have to go through the process and think tactically, okay, well, if this, then this, then this, then this, and this, and the third or fourth or fifth order effect is we get to this moment where potentially there's a Tiananmen Square or Kiev-like moment, right? And I've even heard, and the violence is going to continue to escalate in some level, and someone is going to call out and say, you have to stop this. Okay, so that's one side of it. The other side of it is exactly what you were talking about, is this ideological, in that we're so upset with how far we've fallen as a society into I wouldn't say a police state, but in an overregulated, police enforced narco tyranny, right? If we're in that state, then people exploding their frustration exploding at that level, now is also also understandable.
But I think the unfairness of this.
I don't think I agree with it, but I understand it.
Yeah, right. It's like a good friend that disapproves but understands. One of the other interesting and weird parts of this too, I think nothing has fundamentally changed from the time Trump has been in office to the time Obama was in office from the standpoint of the number of people that cops killed each year. And yet it was this one that caused it to explode. And Obama comes out as if he did everything right. And he has all of these ideas as if he wasn't president of the United States. That's the one part that I do think Trump could basically point out, like, yo, how are you guys hitting me for this when this guy was doing the exact same thing? When right-wingers look at this, are they looking at the level of hypocrisy that associated with some of this stuff and that drives, I guess, a certain degree of anger in the political process?
We've got to go soon, by the way, Tom. Maybe 20 seconds here.
What's that?
About 20 seconds.
I hate to call myself a right winger on this issue because I'm really not. I think that the hypocrisy is a real thing. Yeah. I really do, and it's going to drive voters away from the Democrats this fall.
You guys have been listening to Tom Luongo, geopolitical analyst and publisher of Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter. Join us. We'll be back in a moment. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
And we're back live again, coming to you from across the divided states of America. It is time for another hour, our last hour of the day, of the most divisive show, the most disruptive show, the most educational and eductive show in American radio. In the politically independent corner, I am Shane Stranahan, investigative radio show host.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, the last man on the wall with Shane Stranahan, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
Together on that wall, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I think here's how the wall works. I think it's not Humpty Dumpty. It's a completely different parable than that. It's something like we're sitting on a wall and there's a fracture in the wall between us, and we're trying to sort of talk from across that fracture, sort of fitting the fault lines theme. That unfortunately means that it's not a stable wall. So we've got some work to do mending that wall so we can continue to sit on it. I think that actually is a parable more fitting for the times than Humpty Dumpty. But without further ado, let's get into headlines. We're taking calls, by the way, right after these headlines. So if you want to, you can start calling in within the next couple of minutes, and we'll be around to take your calls right after. Also, Leo from Miami, I saw you called back. We didn't hear you the first time. Sad about that. We saw you called back. Feel free to call back in now, too. We're taking your calls. Again, headlines, though. First up today, a Tampa teen, an Orlando 20-something, and a British 19-year-old were arrested on Saturday for the July 15th hack of Twitter that ended up defrauding over $700,000 worth of Bitcoin from users of Twitter with false requests for Bitcoin donations posted to high-profile accounts. That came out over the weekend. Curious to learn more about that over the coming week. I didn't get into this earlier, but while we have a minute, I just want to say, I'm curious to see if this is a cover for something. I'm curious to see if there was some other aspect of the story where they were connected with people. A lot of people, when this Twitter hack happened, were wondering about how weird it was that you simultaneously had this successful hack of, an incredibly prominent startup. But then on the other hand, it was such a sort of banal, facile, admittedly unhanded thing, but it was like they were just harvesting Bitcoin donations. I don't know. It was simultaneously very successful and high-minded, and also very kind of naive and newbie-like on the other hand. Anyway, that leads me to wonder if there was other stuff going on that this might be a cover for. That's technically a conspiracy theory, but I don't have even a conspiracy theory for it, so it's just a conspiratorial question, I guess. In any event, that's our first headline. In our next headline, the coronavirus response coordinator for the White House Coronavirus Task Force, that's Deborah Birx, on CNN on Sunday, she said that we're in a new phase where COVID is extraordinarily widespread. She also highlighted the fact that the coronavirus is spreading in rural areas. And specifically, she said that, this is a sort of newer aspect of the coronavirus. It's a newer phenomenon in the spread of the coronavirus, that rural areas should be warned about this. She also recommended that people in rural areas should consider wearing a mask at home if they live with someone with comorbidities. That's just, again, I mentioned this earlier, I just see that as striking exactly the wrong kind of person who probably would not want to hear that they have to wear a mask in their own home when they live out in the country, when they're inside with their family. That does seem kind of intrusive to me. In our next headline, top negotiators in Congress are still at loggerheads. Chuck Schumer on Saturday said the negotiations were at their best yet. That came before Nancy Pelosi on Sunday said that both parties have yet to come to an agreement that COVID-19 is a serious issue. They haven't even come to an agreement, apparently, according to Pelosi at least, on how to deal with COVID. The agreement is still, or the disagreement is still over whether or not coronavirus is a serious issue for us to be facing now. If she's right, and I kind of don't think she is, but if she's right, that's severe. That's a pretty damning indictment of both parties, because she did include both parties in that. I don't think she was singling out Republicans, but I'm guessing she's wrong. I'm guessing that there is some consensus and that she's just playing this up as yet another hammer in her own personal coffin that she's trying to make out of her opponents. Anyway, Microsoft is planning a TikTok acquisition for mid-September, September 15th specifically. This came after the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, had a meeting with Trump. This also comes after Trump and the White House more generally have been trying to distance American tech users from the hugely popular Chinese app, TikTok that is. Over the weekend, as the administration weighed TikTok's fate, two GOP lawmakers, Senators Marco Rubio of Florida and Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, expressed both some support for the administration's review of TikTok, as well as some support for the Microsoft purchase. So it seems like this could be a sort of weird geopolitical attempt to sort of knock TikTok out of some level of controversy while maintaining American users' access to it. The thing about this, though, is that aren't like big tech companies coming under a lot of scrutiny for antitrust right now? And wasn't Microsoft the key figure in the antitrust wave against tech companies back in the late 90s, early 2000s? I don't know, man. I'm just noting there might be some inconsistencies here. Anyway, moving on, sweeping that under the rug, Senate investigators have demanded all communications and meetings between Strobe Talbot, Fiona Hill, and other Brookings Fellows, between those groups and Department of State officials. Those officials would include Victoria Nuland, Kathleen A. Kavalek, and Jonathan Weiner. This would be regarding the Steele dossier and also the predecessor to the Steele dossier, the Shearer dossier. Also to be supplied are Department of State communications with Sidney Blumenthal and Cody Shearer, the aforementioned Cody Shearer. Again, a sort of predecessor to the Steele dossier. And as far as I can tell, this is basically wholly to the work of my dad, Lee Stranahan, former host of the show. As far as I can tell, this was the nursery bed, this was the crib out of which the Steele dossier grew up, was the Shearer dossier. You started with the Shearer dossier, you started with this small cohort of people in the State Department associated with the Brookings Institution, associated with the Clintons, specifically Bill Clinton. You start with that, and then eventually you get this entire Russiagate scandal. I don't know, there might be multiple sources of that. In fact, there certainly are, but this was certainly a key component of that. And it begs the question, were there other connections between people associated with Bill Clinton, between the State Department broadly and other aspects of Russiagate? And of course, the answer there is yes. You can just look into the Chalupa sisters. Anyway, we'll have more about that later this week. Going on to the next headline here, New York City has had more shootings so far this year than all of last year. That is so far, 777 people have been shot. That's as of Sunday, compared to last year's total of 776 people. That's, again, we're a little bit over halfway through the year. August 3rd, August 2nd, when this was recorded, about 8 months into the year. That's not good, man. In our next headline, 7 missing Marines and 1 sailor are feared dead after a search was called off Sunday. Those men were part of a training mission with an amphibious assault vehicle that left 3 others on the crew known to be dead or injured. On the East Coast, Hurricane Isaias is currently slowly sweeping up the East Coast, centered just off Florida right now, just off the East Coast of Florida. It is expected to make landfall near Myrtle Beach in the Carolinas late Monday into Tuesday, so late tonight, going into tomorrow, continuing to sweep upward along the coast there throughout the middle of the week. A heat wave in Europe has left London with its highest ever recorded temperature of 100 degrees. San Sebastian, meanwhile, on Spain's northern coast, saw temperatures of 107 degrees Fahrenheit. That was on Thursday. That's the hottest temperature there on record. The city of Palma on Spain's Mediterranean island of Mallorca set a local record of 105 degrees on Tuesday. That was last week, of course. Tens of thousands have protested in Jerusalem over the weekend, calling for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to resign. That's Bibi Netanyahu, some would know him as. 12 protesters were arrested after clashes broke out with police there. In our next story, the first U.S. spaceship to return to Earth from the International Space Station in decades has successfully landed in coastal waters. This was a SpaceX mission with 2 astronauts returning in SpaceX's Crew Dragon ship. And in our next story, there is an active wildfire on over 20,000 acres in the San Bernardino forest east of Los Angeles. I'm actually based on the West Coast. I'm based in right around Palm Springs right now. And I've seen that fire developing. I've seen the smoke from that fire billowing up into the sky and then over my head. And it started to get smoky, actually started to smell smoky since last night. So we were seeing those effects here too. Those are headlines. That's the top news. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right. I see some chatter on economics guests. We've been talking, I mean, we have our private channel. We're talking about getting different folks, different economists to come on and talk because this is going to be a huge issue.
Yeah.
Specifically, this is intersection of politics and economics, but how these relief bills come out. I'm guessing this second one is not going to be the last, assuming the coronavirus carries on into 2021, maybe even 2022. The only thing that I can see propping up American political society are a series of these bills.
Yeah.
You know?
That's true. I mean, like 30 million people weren't able to feed themselves over the last 7 days. I mean, that's astonishing to me. And you're looking at the only thing, some people were making a little bit more than what they would have gotten on their typical jobs. But so what? You're talking about somebody making minimum wage and it's like, okay, you get $200 extra. Great. That the money that those people using are basically going to be injected directly back into our economic system, which means that when they buy something to eat, something to drink, something to, I don't know, some kind of entertainment, that money gets circulated back into the economic system where those people pay their employees based on the money that the people came in when they bought whatever service. I guess the point that I'm making here is it's not as if that money is just being vanished. The money that we were given to people, the $600 extra on top of what they were making from the standpoint of the unemployment, was basically keeping people whole. And millions of people were having difficulty paying their rent, even with the provisions in. Millions had difficulty even feeding themselves, even with the provisions in. And now those things have gone up in smoke. So the catch becomes, what is the economic impact? I think one of the wildest stats, I think it was like 50% of like the retail businesses weren't able to pay their rents. Like it's a cascading failure that seems to be hitting all of these areas of the economy. And the president of the United States, and you know the wild part about this, if Donald Trump would have focused and say, you know what, we're going to get rid of the virus first, and we're going to put all of the emphasis and everything else on getting rid of the virus, the economy could have opened back up much sooner, as opposed to this nonsense where he's pretending as if the virus is not a real thing, even though the thing is the numbers are surging. So, you know, yeah, I think talking to an economist to figure out what is going to happen when people don't have just the basic money to pay for just the basic things. When that money gets drained out of the economy and out of the economic system, what's going to happen? I think it's a vital conversation at this point.
I mean, looking at the Trump administration's response, I'll just focus on the Trump administration's response to COVID. I don't see how it could have been intentional, because if it were intentional, it was the worst move ever. I mean, as far as I can tell, and it's going to be interesting to learn more about this as the years roll on. Hopefully, we learn a lot more. Hopefully, it actually comes to light and doesn't get buried. But the misinformation that I'm guessing was going on in the White House and behind the scenes in the medical community about this stuff, and in the political scene up at those high levels, it just seems to me like there was a lot of actual contradictory info generated by and given to scientists about this stuff from an early point. And I'll put it like this. It makes more sense to me that that's why Trump's response was pretty terrible early on than some sort of self-serving political maneuver, because if it was the latter, it just didn't work. And I don't see how it really could have worked. If they knew that the virus were a real thing that they had to prepare for, and they decided not to do that as some sort of stopgap solution to whatever political problems they foresaw. That was obviously, maybe hindsight is 2020.
It's like worst
that was
case
obviously
answer.
the wrong decision.
Yeah, it was like worst answer ever. So Dr. Birx, she's interesting. Now, the New York Times has done a story where they went into basically what was going on in the White House when they were coming up with the information for the various places. Well, Birx was at the center of that. And she was giving them information that was, let's say, not the same information that Fauci was given. Fauci would come out and say the world is falling apart. And she was giving them more rosy interpretations that Trump was using in order to kind of make his case. Look, he clearly was focused more so on the economy, missing the point that the economy was shut down because of the virus, and that the public would have even given you a pass on the economy if you would have attended to the virus, because they would have accepted the economic shutdown was not your fault. This, I agree with you, was the worst case answer to this particular issue that a person could have came up with.
I'm not sure I buy that last part.
You don't think
actually.
so?
I don't think.
What do you think?
I don't
could
think
have
the
been
public.
worse?
Well, I'll put it like this. No, I don't. Here's the thing. All I was responding to was that the public would have forgiven him basically if the economy had gone to crap while we managed to resist the virus, because it's always this sort of counterfactual scenario. You never know what actually is on the other side, and what people are going to do, particularly his opponents, is blame him for the economic collapse and ignore the catastrophe they never saw. So we're living in that catastrophe. I mean, another side of this stuff, the economy is, on the one hand, the economy is this abstract thing, is particularly in a sort of overly financialized sense of the stock market and stuff. But on the other hand, the economy is just a bunch of people who are living, and trying to make ends meet. So when the economy goes to hell, that people's lives go to hell too. And I mean, we can do the stimulus packages for as long as we have to, I suppose. But on the other end of that is just people not working, people not creating wealth for themselves and for the world. And I don't know, man. I think it's more complicated than just saying it's all about sacrificing the economy in order to save lives. Again, the economy supports our lives. I don't know. Maybe we can come back to that. We're going to be taking calls in this next segment, 202-521-1320. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We're taking calls this segment. 202-521-1320 is the number you should call if you want to call us. We're also on the air. I'm switching very quickly here. You can call in 202-521-1320. But if you want to listen to us, the other side of that little audio spectrum there, you can on the radio in Washington, D.C., 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. You can also catch us in Kansas City, 102.9 and 104.7 FM, also 1140 AM. Also online, we're all over the place for audio. For if you want to listen to us in podcast form over your ears, you can on Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Music, and Spotify. Very prominent broadcasting app, Spotify there. We're also on video on YouTube. You can do a search for Fault Lines Radio or for Jamarl Thomas, Jamarl Thomas. You can find his channel. He's live there. He has video, like actual video of himself. By the way, Jamarl, I'm planning on getting a camera pretty soon that I'll probably be able to do video stuff with. So hopefully we can figure something out there. I know we need to talk to audio engineer Andre, about this stuff to figure out the specifics, but it'd be cool. Also, if you want to listen to us last up here, if you want to listen to us on Periscope, we have a live Periscope feed on Twitter, twitter.com/FaultLinesRadio. Just straight up, Fault Lines Radio. You'll see our feed up top there. We also do have a caller at this point. Rod from Philly. What's going on, Rod?
Hey, what's going on, guys? Yeah, I was just listening to the last segment. We were talking about the economy and the effects of the shutdown and from coronavirus and all that. And, the response that this administration that Donald Trump had, it has been bad. I definitely agree. There is not many passes or excuses you can give Donald Trump. But I'm more on the other spectrum of I think he should have been more skeptical and not taken the people like Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx's advice, and he should have listened to. He should have took more than just the opinion of the people who've been working in government for most of their lives and don't see patients. You know, you have the establishment making excuses for him, but he's obviously politicized coronavirus himself, and any doctor that would do that is not a good doctor in my eyes. And he was asked
Fauci politicized the COVID virus? Wait. How did Fauci politicize the COVID virus?
Let me explain. He politicized the coronavirus because he was asked very specifically, well, what do you think about the protests and people gathering? And he didn't want to answer the question. Why? As a doctor, you have to be objective. He didn't want to answer the question because it was a political game. If he answers it in a way, well, these people should not be gathering in hundreds and thousands and spreading the virus more, which would be hurting people if the virus is as deadly as they say it is. It doesn't matter what the goal and intention of people gathering together. They shouldn't be. But he hasn't been saying anything. He hasn't come out and said anything. He's questioned on it. He wanted to play a game with it.
I listened to that clip, that back and forth between Jim Jordan and Dr. Fauci. And Fauci basically said, my political opinion, or my opinion, is not changing, whether or not it's people out there protesting or whether or not it's people, congregating at some kind of church or something. Fauci's just response basically was, my opinion hasn't changed. Jordan was trying to get him to say or to go after and attack people who are out there protesting. And Fauci's point was, it's not for me to do that. I am making the point that saying a large congregation of people are unhealthy.
Hold on.
Either way.
No, hold on. But he's the doctor. The doctor since this has come on as this virus has been announced as far as in the media in America. Because let's go back for about a month and a half. They were denying it. Every media station would know. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Even Dr. Fauci himself, don't worry about it. For him to since May 25th or May 26th,
you have nearly 160,000 people dead, and your response is that Dr. Fauci is the problem in this. Come on, that's ludicrous. I mean, let's be honest. You're choosing Fauci. I would even give you more leeway if you were going after Birx, because Birx was at least the one that was telling Trump these rosy pictures of the world and everything else when he was going through his policy proposals. But attacking Fauci just seems like a pointless endeavor. I don't even know where this is coming from.
It's coming from Jamarl. It's coming from the fact that Dr. Fauci has a vested interest in all of this. He also has an interest in Moderna and these vaccines. He's been in government for about 40 years through all these administrations. Do you think someone's just squeaky clean walking through all these administrations? Bush.
From my understanding, Dr. Fauci came out and said this virus is going to get worse. The virus got worse. Dr. Fauci is the one that came out and was giving these dark predictions that the Trump administration didn't particularly like, instead preferring Birx, who was giving him these kind of rosy pictures. Fauci, I'm sorry. I don't have any issue with the job Fauci has done on this. And it just seems like pointing to Fauci out of all of the political actors that had something to do with this 150,000, nearly 160,000 people dead and millions being infected, Fauci seems to be the least of the people to go after in this case, as opposed to the people who are in office making those decisions that actually is responsible for the death toll or responsible for these numbers increasing. I'm just amazed that Fauci is the guy that gets so much of your ire in this.
I mean, partly that was played up by the media. Partly this was a politicized thing that, the media did to make money. But then again, he also is one of the key members of the White House Coronavirus Task Force. And again, we went back and forth over this back in the day. He did tell people that they shouldn't wear masks, along with Robert Redfield, director of the CDC, just to try to conserve masks for vital health workers. I understand that we've gone back and forth on this. Right. You don't want to sort of misframe it, but I believe you see that as a sort of political white lie, where they're trying to sort of do that in order to stockpile masks. And even though they're technically lying to people, it makes sense to do because they don't have many other options because we don't have a stockpile of these masks. That's probably your take, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, because basically, if the president would have did his job, Fauci would have never had to give that lie. And even in the case of calling it a lie, I quibble over it because in watching the entirety of his statement, he did introduce all sorts of information to give you an idea where he was coming from. So, but you disagree with that.
I do.
Now,
And I mean, here's another thing. I think he is one of the people. He's been the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, one of the key regulatory medical agencies here, weighing on the issue at hand. And he's been that since 1984. So he's been in there for 35 plus years. It's a long time. You would think that agency would have had a better response to this pandemic than it has. So it's not just Trump. In fact, he's been tenured. He's been in office. He's been in that position of power, ostensibly trying to prepare for this exact kind of issue for a lot longer than any president. For any president that we've elected, any of the officials whose names we know, even most of the senators, he's been working on apparently this issue as well as many others. And so it actually does make sense. I'm maybe playing devil's advocate here slightly, but it actually might make a lot more sense to criticize him for his handling of this issue than it would Trump or any of the other people that we are right now.
Slightly is an understatement. Slightly is an understatement. That is a devil's advocate to an insane degree. Look, Fauci is not the president of the United States. Fauci has no power to use the Defense Production Act to make the items that we need for our country. Fauci is not the guy that can make the policy to make sure kids can go back to school safely, or for that matter, to even have any major real say-so in any of these policies outside of just giving his advice. And so, oh, right, we have more callers. Okay, so let's table this because we can talk about this anytime. So let's go to Adam from Colorado. Adam, what's going on?
Not much. I wanted to actually explain the economics of why coronavirus is actually being used as a shield by Trump. The collapse was actually going on long before that and was due to a combination of Trump's trade war and his tax cuts. So the trade war raises the cost of goods because consumers have to pay more due to tariffs to import the products. Well, because of that, it looks the same as inflation on paper. You then have Trump giving the tax cuts which stimulated stock buybacks. Well, this gave a huge shot to the stock market. Well, that caused the Federal Reserve to have to raise interest rates because that's how they control inflation. By doing that, it caused long-term investors to move from short-term treasury bonds into long-term treasury bonds. When that happens, you can sometimes get a yield inversion where more people are betting that we'll be doing better long-term versus short-term, so you have to pay less interest rate to get people to put their money into long-term bonds. Well, that winds up to when too many people are banged on that, and the percentage of return is lower than short-term bonds, you have what's known as the inversion. Back in the 80s, a study showed that we have a recession within 22 months every time that occurs. That occurred first on December 2018, and then again March all the way to August of 2019. In September of 2019, aside from our production numbers being abysmal, that's when we started having the same type of collapse we had in 2008. The problem is, or rather the good thing is, we put in place in Dodd-Frank the ability for the Fed to, without congressional approval, instantly start putting money into the overnight repo market. They started at $65 billion, it increased to $135 billion by October 10th, and they were continuing that all the way until March. Well, that means we were facing the same type of collapse we were in 2008 back in September of 2019. Now, coronavirus did actually amplify it, first by hitting China, which is the manufacturing center of the world. That's affected production. So because you have less produced, demand stays the same, costs go up. So that's the first hit to us. But the second hit came.
Adam, I'm sorry to have to ask you this. We have two other callers. We only have about a minute and a half. Thank you for that. That was info packed. Please call in at some other point and finish that up. I appreciate the call. Don't want to shut you out, but we've got other people we've got to go to first before we run out of time here. John in Maryland. John, you're on the air. What's going on, John?
Yeah, I want to make a brief comment. This Karen Bass, as far as I'm concerned, she's unacceptable as a VP. I look at her as a radical, pro-Fidel Castro liberal. She's unacceptable. I think one of the mistakes he made, we should at least vetted Stacey Abrams. To me, she's liberal, but she's reasonable. I could support her being a moderate type of Democrat, but I just would never support a Karen Bass. So you better not put her on the ticket.
Okay, fair enough. I'm always trippy when people say that, only because if you're voting for Joe Biden, most of the people who are voting for Joe Biden is there to get rid of Trump. And you're basically saying, if he puts Bass on, I care so much about that, I would prefer Trump to win. Odd stance, but it's a fair. Karen from Maryland, and you'll be the last one, Karen.
Hi there. I'll skip the good morning crap. Just wanted two things. Just wanted to let you know that I'm still having a great deal of difficulty getting into the other shows. I'm still getting the call does not go through message. The message number 3 that the call does not go through. I don't expect you all to address that, but I just thought I'd let you know that. What I actually called in about was to see what your explanation was of this. My understanding is, and maybe you have a different understanding, that under 10% of U.S. households do not have home internet access. So you have a rational explanation about why it is assumed that everybody has home internet access?
So let's take that off the air, and we have to hit the break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming up is Cynthia McKinney. And Karen, we'll take your answer when we get back.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Real quick, I want to respond to Karen from Maryland. I don't know. Is Karen still on, Andre, or is she off? Did she drop out?
On.
She is on. Okay, Karen.
Oh, she's still on? Oh, okay.
Yeah, she is still on. So, Karen, I was just looking into it. I'm curious why you asked this. As far as I can tell, the percentage of American households that lacks internet is above 10%. In 2016, it was about 18%, just over 18% of households in America didn't have internet. I'm sure that's grown since then, but I'm having a hard time finding more recent accurate numbers. But I'm curious, Karen, why'd you ask about that?
Well, no, it's just that, I mean, it is for some reason assumed that everybody does. And it's like, when I'm not sure how every library is set up. I know that the libraries do not have deep internet access for some reason, because I've already tested that out. But, the library, even though it offers free internet access, and there are very few places that offer free internet access, they will offer you, they'll allow you to borrow a hotspot. You should know what that is, but they don't have any equipment that you can use. So if you don't at least have a laptop to work with, then you're also without internet access. So the only free access that they offer is either sitting there in the parking lot and you can use their Wi-Fi, or they'll offer you something portable to use as a hotspot. But I just don't know why the assumption is made that everybody's got internet access when some have to go to the library, to use it. And some that use the library have it as their goal to eventually get home access, and others don't have it as their goal to eventually get home access. But I'd just like to know why
Karen,
the assumption is made.
I want to thank you for the call. We appreciate it. I don't know why the assumption. Maybe it's America. People just kind of assume that everyone has it. But those numbers, I think 10% or 18%, I think is what Shane came up with.
I just don't know who makes that assumption. I haven't heard somebody make that assumption. I mean, I guess that assumption would be made, but I don't know if this was in response to something specific.
Yeah, that's fair.
In any event.
I know what you mean. It's like, well, where did you get that one from? So fair enough. But we are here. We have Cynthia McKinney with us. When China Sneezes is her new book. Now, Dr. Cynthia McKinney is a former member of the United States Congress, speaker, author, and internationally recognized multiple award-winning human rights activist. Her latest book, When China Sneezes, provides insight into the nature of the global pandemics such as SARS, MERS, Ebola, and HIV and AIDS. It examines ground zero and a massive effort that China undertook in order to deal with the spread, including individual stories during the lockdown. This is going to be a very interesting interview because I am really interested to hear about this. Dr. McKinney, welcome to the show.
Thank you all for asking me to be back on. And I literally put the book to bed 2 days ago. So it is now at the typesetter, and after that, it will be on the presses. So I'm hoping that people will be interested enough in alternative narrative other than they're getting from Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birch, and actually.
What did China do? Okay, well, we're going to have to bring Cynthia McKinney back. But it seems like she is not a fan of Dr. Fauci, so we're going to get to see that one. But I am interested in what was life like in China under that lockdown. Because whatever they did, I mean, they were building hospitals, they were all of the stuff. This seems like the highest priority was basically to deal with the virus itself. I am curious on what it was like to live there, especially the individual stories of people as they went through the shutdown, their perspectives. Did they take this kind of point of view of, I don't want to wear a mask or I don't want to be stuck in the house? Or was it, I'm curious on how other countries was dealing with this particular virus, especially from the standpoint of how the public was dealing with it. And did they have such, I guess you could say, integrity issues that we have in the United States where we don't necessarily believe the government when they're coming out with the stories and stuff?
Yeah.
So
yeah. There's huge across, as far as I can tell, every aisle of significance here. I mean, whether it's between the United States and China over the last 5+ months, or between Republicans and Democrats, or between various scientists, it seems like there's a legitimate degree of controversy with most of the scientific establishment. For just with taking the issue of hydroxychloroquine, for instance, most of the scientific establishment saying that it's not useful, and then a small but significant minority of the scientific establishment saying that it is useful. Not just sort of avant-garde or alternative fringe players, as far as I can tell, but some actual fairly prominent people have come out in favor of it being useful. But again, as far as I can tell, the overwhelming majority of people say that it isn't. So it's like the aisles are operating in every sphere. The divisions are operating in every sphere. You have political divisions, you have politic divisions, you have divisions from the very sources you should trust to generate information about what we should do, both to combat the coronavirus as well as info about its spread, all that stuff. It's messy, man.
It is messy. And I think we have Cynthia, I think we have Dr. McKinney back. Doctor, can you hear me?
She left.
Okay, fair enough.
Oh, she left again. Oh, shucks.
Yeah. We're having a little bit of difficulty getting on our guest, but when she finally gets the connection back, she'll be back with us. Look, science is not the easiest thing in the world. It looks, I know this sounds strange, but when you're looking at something that is taking place, oh, Dr. McKinney?
Yeah, I think I have a very, very, very poor connection. I'm out on a farm. And so I don't know that I will be able to do this.
Well, we'll try. And if you drop off, we'll understand what happened. Because we can hear you currently.
Okay, very good.
Let me ask you this. In writing this book, what was life like in China during the time where all of this initially hit? I am enamored by this notion that there were stories of people who basically was living under the quarantine when China was going through the thick of this. And the countries were wagging their fingers at what China was doing. Oh, look at how authoritarian they are. Until the numbers basically went down to nil in China and they started going up everywhere else. What was life like under the quarantine there?
Well, it's very interesting because we have one perspective that was provided to us by an African citizen who is living in China, has been living in China for the past, actually venturing there in order to learn the language because of the huge influence that China is now on the African continent. And this story really encapsulates the problem of people who are completely unfamiliar with other races. And that seemed what she encountered while she was under quarantine. A very fascinating story about just, getting sick in a foreign country and being of a different race and having doctors that other peoples, other races, other ethnicities. So that was really interesting.
Wow. But did they, like, let me try to be specific. In the United States, when they kind of made a point of saying, look, we need to try to deal with the virus, and here are the techniques to try to deal with the virus. And you had a certain segment of the population to balk, another segment of the population that says, okay, fair enough, putting a mask on and social distancing is a small price to pay for it. What were the perspectives of the people in China as they went through it? Did they agree with the government's actions, or did they have their own ideas in regards to whether or not this was acceptable protocol?
One of the lockdown diarists wrote about the tremendous spirit of the community, a community that was exhibited by the people, and that everyone complied, everyone wanted to comply, because of course the Chinese people had the experience of SARS. And so if you went to China, as I did before, you would see people wearing masks just regularly going about their business. So wearing a mask was nothing because of what had happened with SARS and the great air pollution that exists also in China, or at least existed at that time.
Oh, I see what you mean. So everybody basically was on the same page because of the previous encounter with the other aerial diseases. I mean, I noticed that when I was in Vietnam, it was the same thing. People would almost wear masks in this kind of perfunctory way as they went about their affairs. Do you think that's the distinction between us and them in the way that we dealt with this? Like, do you think it's that breakdown of community where, like, for example, if in the United States we were at war with another country, and while we're at war with that country, they would say every citizen needs to cut their light off because we don't want to get bombed at night. I couldn't imagine a certain segment of the population screaming, no, it's my right to have my light on. This is my individual liberty, et cetera, et cetera. But that seems to be the way a percentage of the country is with this virus. What did you think were the material differences in regards to the way America's dealt versus the way they dealt?
I find it ironic who chose to cover their faces and their heads. Yeah, I have a poor connection.
Yeah, this
So
might be too bad.
So let's do this. Let's take an early break, and we'll be back in maybe a minute or two. We're trying to talk to Cynthia McKinney, but if we get the opportunity, we'll have an opportunity to speak with her. This is Thomas and Stranahan. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. We'll be back in a moment.
I think we gotta drop her.
We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We were trying to have a conversation over the last couple of the last segment and this segment with Dr. Cynthia McKinney. We're going to be talking about her new book, When China Sneezes. But we've had a very hard time getting through. If you've been listening for the last 10, 15 minutes, you've been hearing her connection keeps dropping. It's very shaky. She said just very briefly that she was out on a farm. I would love to be out on a farm, but that's beside the point. She said that she was out on a farm. Her connection is shaky, and that's causing problems. And therefore, I think we may just have to cut it, which is sad. But you know what? Maybe we can make something beautiful out of it. If you want to give us a call, 202-521-1320 is the number to call, 202-521-1320. Quick note, I was trying to figure out, one of the first questions I wanted to ask her was just when her book comes out, because I was looking into it a little bit. I saw some late October, some early November. I've seen contradictory evidence about when this book is going to come out. And we're trying to call her back. She's not even picking up anymore. Her connection
she said
is
she just finished the typeset or something. Like she's basically has just gotten to the point where it's, I guess, ready to go out for publication. So it should be out soon. Cynthia McKinney came on my show, I think this was almost like years ago, and I was so enamored because she was in Congress. She got to see what was taking place behind the scenes. And it's like, it's not, I think XYZ is happening. It's, I know because I was actually there. And so she was always a really interesting person for me in regards to her political stance and her political cadence. And so I was so enamored with getting her on the show. And so hopefully she'll be able to make our way back. There's something else that's going on right now. And this gets into this whole idea of primary Americanism. Meaning, what does it mean to be an American? And what are your responsibilities as a citizen of the country? And Republicans basically was willing to let the Supreme Court die on the vine. I think that was the word. They was die on the vine by withholding Merrick Garland from that seat. Merrick Garland was the milquetoast of milquetoast Democrats, and they still blocked him from that seat. Well, now the Democrats are basically telling Republicans, don't you dare try to stick somebody in that seat. Now, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is ill. If anything happens to her between now and the end of this presidency, Trump could get one more Supreme Court pick. But Democrats are now trying to come up with ways to mitigate Republicans' actions on the Supreme Court. Hypocrisy, man. It's a horrendous cancer in our politics. Because the moment that one party does it, the other party feels justified and some kind of commiserate response. And it ends up just being, a race to the bottom where your political system and the higher ideals and responsibilities of the various people in that political system take a back seat to their just own political ambitions. And here we are again.
Yeah.
Here we are again.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's all terrible. No, pardon me. It's all great. The political figures who have our best interest at heart are working things out behind the scenes. I'm sure everything will be okay. You don't need to worry. No, man, no, it's all frustrating. It's all deeply frustrating. I kind of can't help but blame ancients throughout history who, when civilization has declined, just decided to go live in a hut somewhere, kind of out in the forest, away from everybody and everything. And I see a lot of people, including myself, who have some of those yearnings in the modern era too. And I almost feel like it's as proportionate as it used to be, despite claims of deep involvement by people around the world, not least of which is supposed to be in America, in various political processes. This sort of last couple of 100 years of people getting more and more engaged, at least that's the cover story. It just seems like we've gotten more and more disenfranchised from any real degree of political power. I can't help but feel like this whole thing on the highest shows is sort of like a carnival. I might have mentioned this on the air before, but it has this sort of carnival-esque, or like a circus or something like that. I mean, there's the Roman phrase bread and circuses, where you give people the base means of sort of subsistence and entertainment in order to distract them and please them while everything breaks down over their heads. I mean, at the end of the day, thankfully, it's not the sky that's falling. It's just the little building that we built for ourselves. So it's not like the universe is going to end as things break apart. But I can't help but feel like things are breaking apart, like the center's not holding in our political system. And all that I have hopes for, just in closing briefly here, all that I have hopes for is that on the other side of this, we'll get a chance to sort of rebuild ourselves back up. Now, I'm not talking about civilizational collapse or apocalypse. I'm not talking about stuff like that. I'm really just talking about local political governance and this idea that if the federal government breaks down, that what steps in and takes the reign are local governments and maybe some state action there too, as people seek to build their communities back up. That's really all that I can hope for, is that on the other side of whatever wildfires seem to be erupting in our political system, that something beautiful lies in the ashes. That's really the only thing that I have hope for at this point.
Same here. I agree with that. Basically, this notion that, yeah, this is bad now, but at some point it'll change. Things always change. Even if they get horrific before the change, well, it will change at some point. I'm having this conversation in my head of two slaves sitting there. One said, this is always going to be this way. And the other one is like, well, no, it's not. Well, the guy who says it's always going to be this way has, several hundred years of a track record to back it up. By the same token, though, it is a flat fact that one of the key things that always happens is change. And so, that Star Trek universe where I get my flying car and I get my Hyperloop and I get to be on the rim of a spaceship watching Jupiter. In 1,000 years, maybe. No, don't seem like it's going to happen anytime soon.
No, here's the thing. In a weird way, let's just put it in these terms. That feels like a stale dream. And I hold that dream. But that feels like a dream that belongs in the 50s or the 60s or something like that. At 60, 70 years old, all the people who are thinking those kinds of thoughts are either moribund or already dead. And that very fact is incredibly sad. Anyway, I don't think we should go out on such a cynical note. There are some things to keep closer to our hearts. We're also taking calls, 202-521-1320. We've got about 6-7 minutes, something like that left if you want to call in and talk with us.
Yeah, I guess that is a pretty cynical note. I mean, personally, I think it's rather hopeful. Over the expanse of time, how many years has humanity been here? 100,000 years or something to that effect? And when you're talking about the expanse of time, you're talking about almost an infinity. And while it's true that Earth has a finite amount of time where it's going to be here, at a certain point the sun is going to expand as it tries to break down its chemicals in regards to the way it goes with its fusion. And it will expand to a point where it absorbs the Earth. Yes. But up to that point, you're talking about billions of years. If we don't off ourselves, then there's the potential for something to change over that expanse of time. And time doesn't necessarily care all that much about time. So I don't think it's too cynical. I think the cynicism of it is it's not going to be tomorrow. But I think that's just the reality of it. When you're looking at it over the expanse of time, look, either humanity kills itself or humanity becomes something amazing. I hope it's the latter. And sometimes it doesn't always feel that way. Sometimes it feels like the former. We don't use basic technological know-how for the best interests of the humanity itself. And I think that's the weirdest thing in the world. Like, that is literally our freeing maneuver. And it's a maneuver that we don't necessarily engage all that much in. The ability to clothe, feed, put roofs over people's heads. Those are just technological quirks. And those are things at this point that we know how to do extraordinarily well. We just choose not to do it. So I don't know what needs to take place. I don't know if all of these people losing their homes, or for that matter, getting kicked out of their homes, is enough in and of itself to spur people to may want to engage their political system in somewhat of a more direct way. But I don't know what it is. And I started to think to myself, what does that look like if this is not it? Meaning, if having all of these people die, it's not it. If having all of these people that are ill, it's not it. If having all of these people have to deal with these medical bills and expenses and everything else, if that's not it, then what is? And I think that is a terrifying reality.
I guess here's the way I don't see it almost sounds to me, and I'm not saying this, the feeling that I'm getting, not from necessarily exactly from you or even from what you're saying, but the feeling that I'm getting in general is sort of looking to our political system, to our government, as some agent that's capable in some way, even capable of having like an understanding, having a deeper level of common understanding within it about what's going on, let alone what we should do about it. I don't think that's at all true. I don't think there's any there. You know what I mean? There's no rhyme or reason. There's only the sort of pure mechanics of the system as it's growing and breaking itself. It seems to be both slowly growing and slowly breaking despite its growth, just because it hasn't set itself up for sustainable growth. And when there's no there, when there's nobody inside nobody behind the curtain for you to talk to who's actually running the machine, you have to ask yourself what you're going to do about it. That's ultimately where it comes down. And
well, I think you're also getting on
that's
something.
Where it gets most exciting.
Well, but I think you're hitting on this notion too that there's no point. Like, it's one thing if your society, like a perfect example in Star Trek in Discovery, where they were talking about an alternate dimension or something. They were talking about the people who were in the original Star Trek, and they said these guys are a cult. Well, why did they call them a cult? Because they cared about multiculturalism, diversity. They cared about ensuring that people had the things that they need. You didn't want to be racist or sexist or bigoted, etc. And so they were like, those guys are a cult. Those guys are basically in a mindset of the way they go about it. But that mindset gives them purpose, meaning this is how we want our world to be. This is what we believe are the tenets, the best things that our world and our civilization could utter and master. We don't have that. We have that in this kind of grab bag, everybody get what they can sort of way, not necessarily that you have a purpose and a tenor in the way that your society is going. And maybe that's what you need. I mean, maybe there does need to be a man behind the curtain of sorts, and maybe not necessarily a man or individual behind the curtain, but something that gives an orienting or a organizing principle in regards to action. Because otherwise, I think this is what you get, just chaos.
I think that's what we're living in. And I think something else that we agree on that a lot of people probably don't. I don't think either of us see one or even a very few number. It's not like we see this big conspiracy going on. I think you and I each see things mechanically as a lot of different parties fighting, and there are a lot of very powerful parties who are fighting over what to do behind the scenes. But it's not like there's a sort of grand plan or a grand conspiracy that we're sitting under. I think we probably disagree with a lot of people there, probably some of our audience too. But one of the side effects of that, I mean, there's something almost comforting if you have this idea that there's a plan of action, even a negative plan of action. At least there's some solace in knowing that somebody is in charge, that there's somebody who's made sense
somebody
of it.
Cares, right?
Yeah, somebody cares enough to do evil at least, and somebody's able to do that. There's some confidence in that, the idea that there's that power. But if you don't have that, then it's all just a kind of a mess. It's almost like a natural disaster, where you're just having to deal with events as they come. And yeah, man, I think another way of looking at this is if you have these larger political organisms that are fighting and straining and slowly dying, then what you need to do if you want to best those, if you want to outmode them, is you need to come up with your own instruments. You need to create your own ventures. You need to come up with the tools that will either reform and thus replace the current institutions, or you just need to come up with the ones that'll replace them flat out. I think there's so much energy. I see a lot of people doing that kind of thing, but I could see so much more. But go for it, Jamarl.
That's why I point to this notion of a higher ideal. Because if you are just a political actor and nothing else matters, meaning I would stab Lady Liberty in the shins if it allows me to get, just 1 nanometer further in my political objectives, that completely undermines any notion of being even a citizen. I mean, at that point, you're just working entirely and grossly for your own political ends. I'm saying at some point, I would imagine there used to be this ideal that there's certain things that we can't do because those things will break any notion of what it means to be in the best interest of a country. That seems to just have gone away. Like, I can't imagine back during the 40s where a Supreme Court pick will come up and they would just say, yeah, we're just going to let that down the vine. That's a mind-blowing prospect. And because at that point, they've come to the conclusion, we're not going to be penalized for taking an action that radically goes against the Constitution. We, despite us not necessarily liking Obama, we, at the very least, are working under the context of a Constitution, in which case we still have a responsibility of choosing a Supreme Court pick. No, that was off the table. And I'm saying that gets worse the moment that both sides get into their heads that the American stuff matters less, our own political party ambitions matter more. And that's a horrible place to be as a country.
Well, because that becomes a deep division. If you look at it from the cybernetic perspective, there's no longer that one organism that can sort of make sense of itself. Instead, there's just this division within it, this fracture within it that exacerbates itself. And that can get worse over time. We're about to close out here. We're going to be going into our last minute. We're about to be back tomorrow. A great interview. Sad we didn't get to talk more with Cynthia McKinney at 9:30. She had to drop out. But earlier on in the show, we were joined by Tom Luongo at 8:30 Eastern. We were talking about anarcho-tyranny and the subject of Michael Flynn's ongoing investigation, arguably after he's been exonerated. We're also joined at 7:30 by Greg Palast, finishing up the second half of our pre-recorded interview with him from last Friday. We'll be back tomorrow. You've been listening to the most disruptive show in American politics. You've been listening to Fault Line with Thomas and Stranahan.
Guys, as always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe. I have to be honest, I am dragging ass today. And I am feeling miserable. But still, we're here, Fault Lines, doing the news, all that good stuff. You guys may see me later today, but I'm going to get some rest. So I'm going to say like, share, and of course, subscribe.